Hey friends! Glad you're here at Eclipse Wizardry. We've cooked up something special. What if Hermione and Fleur both recognized Harry's core at age 9 and magic refused to let either one release him? Liking and subscribing really helps us out. Okay, story time. Chapter 1. Pull the cupboard under the stairs at number 4. Privet Drive smelled like old shoes and rust and the particular kind of silence that comes from being forgotten. Harry Potter had lived in it for as long as he could remember, and he had long since stopped being angry about it. Anger was loud. Loud got you locked in without supper. He had learned, the way small animals learn things, through repetition and consequence, that the safest version of himself was the smallest one. But his magic had never gotten that memo. It started the summer he turned 9, not with a bang, nothing so dramatic. It started the way important things usually do, quietly, like a shift in air pressure before a storm. He was sitting cross-legged on his thin mattress, turning a dead spider over in his fingers because there was nothing else to do, when he felt it. A warmth. Not from the spider, not from the single bare bulb above his head. From somewhere deeper, somewhere behind his ribs, like a coal that had been cold for years and had finally, without ceremony, decided to glow. He pressed his hand flat against his sternum. Hello, he thought, because it seemed rude not to. The warmth pulsed once, like a heartbeat that wasn't his. Then it went still, and Harry sat in the dark for a long time, not moving, not wanting to disturb whatever had just woken up inside him. He didn't tell the Dursleys. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell, and even if there had been, he wouldn't have known what words to use. He only knew that after that night, he felt less alone in the cupboard, and that the dead spider he'd been holding had, very briefly, moved its legs. In a flat above a bookshop in Bristol, Hermione Granger was doing 3 things simultaneously, finishing a chapter of A Brief History of Time, arguing under her breath with a crossword puzzle, and trying very hard to ignore the feeling that something on the other side of England desperately needed her attention. She pressed her pencil to the page. 12 across. 7 letters. Ancient Greek concept of predetermined fate. She knew the answer. She'd known it before she'd read the clue. But her hand wasn't writing Moira, her hand was drawing a face in the margin. A boy's face. Messy hair. Round glasses. A scar she couldn't explain on a forehead she'd never seen. Hermione stared at the drawing for a long moment, then looked up at the ceiling. That's not the answer, she told the crossword. Her magic, which had been expressing itself lately in small and increasingly inconvenient ways, books flying off shelves toward her hands, her bedroom lamp flickering on before she reached the switch, a full cup of tea that had somehow moved 6 inches to the left so she wouldn't knock it over, did something new. It hummed. Low and resonant, like a string that had been plucked. Like a question answered in a frequency she couldn't quite hear. Hermione put down her pencil. She picked it up again and finished drawing the scar. She didn't know why. She just knew, in the unsettling and absolute way she knew things she hadn't yet read in any book, that it mattered. In the south of France, in a stone house with lavender growing up the walls and a garden that smelled of thyme and summer heat, Fleur Delacour stopped mid-pirouette and nearly fell into the fountain. Her grandmother caught her elbow. Dousement, Grandmere said, which meant gently but which Fleur had always interpreted as stop doing everything so aggressively. Something's wrong, Fleur said. Her French was rapid, clipped. She pressed both hands against her chest the way she'd seen doctors do in films when they were checking for damage, and found nothing wrong with her heart rate, nothing wrong with her breathing, nothing but that feeling, that maddening, warm, inexplicable feeling that her magic was pointing at something she couldn't see. Grandmere, who was 73, had survived 2 wars, and had the kind of eyes that suggested she had forgotten more about magic than most people would ever learn, went very still. Describe it, she said. It's like, Fleur turned her hands over, looking at her palms as if they might have the answer written on them. It's like my magic recognizes something. Something far away. But not something dangerous. Something, she stopped. made a frustrated sound. Inevitable, she finished, because it was the only word that fit. Grandmere was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than comfortable. Mon cœur, she said finally, very softly, how old are you? 9, Fleur said, irritated. You know how old I am. Oui. Grandmere looked at her with an expression Fleur couldn't decode, something between grief and wonder. You are very young to feel that. What is it? But Grandmere only kissed the top of her head and said, patience, and went inside, and Fleur stood in the garden with lavender brushing her ankles and her magic pointing stubbornly at something 2 countries away that had messy hair and a scar she would not see for 4 more years. The first time Harry deliberately used his magic, he was defending a cat. The cat belonged to Mrs. Figg next door and was named Mr. Tibbles and was, by any objective measure, an unpleasant animal. But it was small, and Dudley and his gang of 3 had cornered it behind the garden shed, and something in Harry's chest went from a gentle warm glow to something considerably more urgent. He didn't plan what happened next. He simply walked around the corner of the shed, looked at 4 boys who were twice his size, and said, leave it alone. Dudley turned. His face did the thing it always did when he looked at Harry, a reflexive contempt that had been installed so early it was basically furniture. Or what, freak? What happened next was not a decision. It was simply a consequence. The air around Harry shifted. Not dramatically, no lightning, no fire, no theatrical display of the sort that would later define certain wizarding duels. It was subtler than that. The light changed. The shadows sharpened. The temperature dropped in a very specific 3-foot radius around Harry's body, and Mr. Tibbles, who had been cowering, abruptly sat up straight and walked out between Harry's feet with the calm dignity of something that knew it was no longer the most dangerous creature in the alley. Dudley's gang took a collective step back. Dudley himself didn't more actions write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, Sorting Complications. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at exactly 11 o'clock, which Hermione knew because she had checked her watch 4 times, cross-referenced it against the large clock above Platform 9, and then verified it a 5th time just to be certain. She was organized like that. It wasn't anxiety, or it was, a little, but mostly it was that she liked knowing where she stood in relation to time. Time was reliable. Time didn't surprise you. Harry Potter had surprised her. She'd found him 20 minutes into the journey, compartment by compartment, because she was looking for a boy named Neville who had lost a toad and seemed genuinely distressed about it, and she'd slid open the door of the 3rd compartment from the back and there he was, messy hair, round glasses, a faint scar on his forehead, and her magic had done something so violent and immediate that she'd grabbed the door frame. It wasn't pain. It wasn't anything she had a word for. It was recognition, the same way you recognize your own name called from across a crowded room, except the name it was calling wasn't Hermione, it was something older and deeper, something written in a language that predated English by several thousand years. She stood in the doorway and stared at him. He looked up from a chocolate frog card, Dumbledore, she would notice later, which felt pointed in retrospect, and looked back at her. And his magic reached across the 6 feet of compartment floor between them and said, very clearly, there you are. You have a scar, Hermione said, because she had been thinking it for 2 years and it came out before she could apply any kind of filter. Harry blinked. Hello to you too. Sorry. She stepped inside and sat down across from him with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd already decided this was going to happen regardless of social convention. I'm Hermione Granger. I've seen your face before. In a drawing. That I drew. Without meaning to. He stared at her. I know how that sounds, she said. It sounds exactly like something my magic has been doing for 2 years, Harry said. And he said it without hesitation, without embarrassment, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who had spent a long time alone with a truth and had simply decided to speak it. Harry Potter. He held out his hand. She took it. The warmth that had been sitting behind her sternum for 2 years, patient, waiting, quietly persistent, expanded. Not explosively, not in the melodramatic way she'd read about in the novels her mum kept on the high shelf and thought Hermione hadn't noticed. It expanded the way a room warms when someone opens the curtains in the morning. Steady. Inevitable. Already there. Harry's eyes went wide for just a second. Then something in his face that she'd already noticed, a kind of held-in quality, a practiced smallness, loosened slightly, the way a fist opens when the danger is gone. "Oh," he said. "Yes," Hermione agreed. They sat like that for a moment, their hands still clasped, the train moving through the green English countryside, and Neville's toad was entirely forgotten. Ron Weasley appeared 20 minutes later and was immediately irritating. Not maliciously, Hermione would think about this later with considerable fairness, just thoughtlessly, in the way of someone who had never needed to be careful with words because words had never been used on him as weapons. He had a smear of something on his nose, an infectious grin, and the complete inability to read a room that Hermione was beginning to suspect was a Weasley family trait. "Harry Potter," he said, when he'd wedged himself into the compartment and spotted the scar. "Brilliant. I'm Ron. Is it true you can still remember, I mean, can you actually recall you-know-who?" "No," Harry said pleasantly. "I was one. I don't remember anything from when I was one. Do you?" Ron opened and closed his mouth. "That's a fair point actually. I thought so." Hermione watched Harry across the compartment with a new kind of attention. She'd been cataloguing him since the handshake, the way he spoke, the way he held himself, the way he'd gone very quiet when Ron first mentioned Voldemort, not fearful but assessing, like someone doing a rapid calculation behind their eyes. He had the particular economy of movement that she associated with people who had learned to take up as little space as possible, but it sat strangely on him now, ill-fitting, like a coat he'd outgrown without noticing. His magic, she could feel, was nothing like small. It was enormous and patient and warm, and it sat in the air of the compartment like a banked fire, not hidden, just waiting. Ron was still talking about Quidditch. Harry caught Hermione's eye across the compartment and the corner of his mouth went up. She looked away before she smiled. The castle appeared out of the dark above the lake like something that had always been there and had simply been waiting for the clouds to move, and Harry stood in the bow of a small boat next to Hermione and felt his magic expand into the space around it with a kind of relief he didn't fully understand. Like a word you've been trying to remember all day and have finally caught. "Home," his magic said. Harry had never had one of those before. He stood up a little straighter in the boat. Neville, 2 boats over, had found his toad. Ron was trying to remember the incantation for the floating charm and getting it wrong. The castle threw light across the water in long gold bars, and somewhere inside it, something very old was aware of Harry's arrival and was, in its ancient and architectural way, paying attention. McGonagall met them at the door. She was exactly as formidable as her reputation, which Hermione had researched thoroughly on the train using Hogwarts, a history, and had described to Harry in precise detail, strict but fair, genuinely brilliant, the sort of teacher who respects students who do the work, and Harry had listened and filed it all away with a kind of focused attention that Hermione found quietly gratifying. "The first years will wait here," McGonagall said, and her voice was the human equivalent of the castle itself, solid, old, unimpressed by most things. "I will return when we are ready for you. Please compose yourselves." She swept away. Several first years immediately stopped composing themselves and started whispering. "Do you know how we're sorted?" Ron asked, with the tone of someone who hoped the answer would make him feel better. "Yes," Hermione said. "How?" "A hat. An enchanted hat that reads your mind and determines which house you belong in based on your fundamental nature." Ron stared. "That's anticlimactic, I know." Harry hadn't said anything. Hermione glanced at him. He was looking up at the ceiling of the entrance hall, vaulted, stone, lit by floating candles, with an expression she was beginning to learn, the one that meant he was running through something quietly in his head and would share it when he'd finished. "What house do you think you'll get?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. "I don't know enough about myself to be sure." He paused. "Which is strange. I've been alive 9 years and I don't really know what I'm like." The honesty of it hit her like a flat palm. "I think," she said carefully, "that you know more than you're giving yourself credit for." He looked at her then, and for a moment the practiced smallness was completely gone, and what she saw underneath it was extraordinary, not the dangerous, flashy power she'd read about in accounts of great wizards, but something far more interesting. Something deep and quiet and certain, the magical equivalent of bedrock. "Maybe," he said. The ghosts came through the wall and everyone screamed except Harry and Hermione, who had both read about them, and Harry, who Hermione suspected would not have screamed anyway. The Sorting Hat had been placed on every first-year head at Hogwarts for 1,000 years. It had sorted cowards into Gryffindor and heroes into Hufflepuff and ambitious idiots into Ravenclaw and at least 3 Dark Lords into Slytherin and innumerable, uncategorizable, complicated humans into all 4 houses, and it believed, with the certainty of a millennium's experience, that it had encountered every possible variation of magical person. It had not encountered Harry Potter. The hat sat on Harry's head for 12 seconds, an eternity, by Sorting Hat standards. Most students were done in 3, and in that 12 seconds the Sorting Hat did something it had not done in 400 years. It reconsidered. "Well," the hat said, inside Harry's head. "Hello." "Hello," Harry said back, calm as a Tuesday. "You're not afraid of me." "Should I be?" "Most children are, at least slightly. Even the brave ones." "I've been living with the Dursleys for 9 years," Harry said. "You're a hat." The hat made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Fair enough. Now, let me look." A pause. "Oh. Oh, that's interesting." "What is?" "Your magic." "I haven't felt a core like this in," the hat stopped itself. "Where would you like to go?" Harry thought about it seriously, which the hat appreciated. Most children either grabbed for glory or deflected from fear. Harry simply sat with the question and thought it through. "Where do you think I should go?" "Honestly? All 4 houses would suit you, which is not me being diplomatic, it's genuinely true. You have Gryffindor's courage and you didn't have to work for it, it's just structural. You have Ravenclaw's intelligence, though you've had very little education and don't know it yet. You have Hufflepuff's loyalty and Slytherin's capacity for strategy and patience." The hat paused again. "You are the most balanced first year I have sorted in living memory." "Then put me somewhere useful," Harry said. "Useful how?" "Wherever I can learn the most. Wherever there are people worth protecting." The hat sat with that for 2 full seconds. "Gryffindor." The table in red and gold erupted, and Harry walked to it with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already decided the shouting didn't change anything fundamental, and sat down, and looked back across the hall. Hermione was still waiting. She met his eyes. He nodded once, and something in her chest unclenched. When the hat touched her head, it took 4 seconds. "Gryffindor." She sat next to him. Their elbows touched on the bench and the warmth between them settled like it had been there always. 3 tables over, Draco Malfoy had been watching. He had expected to find Harry Potter odd and uncertain, someone easily impressed by the right name and the right lineage, someone who could be steered. He had been coached on this by his father, not overtly, Lucius was too careful for overt, but the coaching had been there in the selective stories told over dinner, in the particular way his father had said the Potter boy will need guidance, as if guidance were something the Malfoys kept in stock. What Draco had found instead, on the steps of the Hogwarts Express, was a boy who'd looked at his offered hand, at his offered name, and declined with the kind of unconcerned politeness that suggested he simply hadn't found the offering interesting. Not rudely. Not with hostility. Just no, thank you, and that was the most unsettling part. Now Draco watched Harry Potter sit at the Gryffindor table and speak quietly to the Granger girl, Mudblood, his father would say, but Draco found the words sitting less comfortably than it used to, and there was something about the two of them together that made the fine hairs on Draco's arms stand up. He couldn't name it. He was 11, he didn't have the language. But he had enough of his father's instincts to know that what he was looking at was something his father would want to know about, and something that would be very, very difficult to manage. He looked away before Harry could catch him staring. He wasn't sure why. He just didn't want to meet those eyes again. The first week at Hogwarts established several things very quickly. Harry was not average. This was not a surprise to Hermione, who had felt his magic and spent a week on the train and in corridors quietly cataloguing everything he did, the way she catalogued everything when she wanted to understand it. It was a surprise to the teachers, who had prepared themselves for the son of James and Lily Potter, expected something rawly talented, probably showy, needing direction, and found instead something that already had direction, had simply been pointing it at survival for the past 9 years and was now, with the ease of water finding a new channel, redirecting it toward learning. In charms, Flitwick demonstrated the levitation charm, Wingardium Leviosa, with the swish and flick, and Harry's feather was off the desk before Flitwick had finished the demonstration. Not floating. Rising. Steadily, controlled, 3 feet up and held. Flitwick stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned. "Mr. Potter," Flitwick said, recovering himself with the professional grace of a man who had taught for 40 years. "That was, yes. Excellent. Have you had prior instruction?" "No, sir," Harry said, which was technically true. He'd had no instruction in anything except durability. "Remarkable." Flitwick looked at the feather, still hanging perfectly stable in the air. "Can you bring it down in a controlled descent?" Harry brought it down. Slowly, evenly, without a wobble. 2 seats to his left, Ron's feather was still sitting flat on the desk. Ron stared at Harry with an expression caught somewhere between admiration and the beginning of something more complicated. In Transfiguration, McGonagall turned her desk into a pig and back, which was meant to be impressive and was, but when she set the class the task of turning a match into a needle, she happened to glance at the Gryffindor third row and find Harry holding a perfect silver needle between his fingers, examining it, and then, almost experimentally, turning it back into a match. McGonagall went still. "Mr. Potter," she said, walking over. "Do that again." He did. Her expression was the controlled, precise face of someone keeping a great deal inside a very small space. She examined the needle, the match, the needle again. "Have you been practicing over the summer?" "No, Professor. I didn't know about Transfiguration until last week." McGonagall was quiet for long enough that the students on either side of Harry shifted nervously. Then she put the needle down on his desk very carefully, as if it might do something surprising. "See me after class," she said, in a voice that could have meant anything. After class, she asked him 12 questions, each more technical than the last, about intent and visualization and the nature of transfiguration theory. He answered 9 of them correctly without having read the textbook. The other 3, he said, "I don't know yet, but I'd like to," and she looked at him for a long moment. "Your mother," McGonagall said, quietly, "was one of the finest Transfiguration students I ever taught. Natural talent, disciplined work ethic, exceptional judgment." She paused. "Your father was considerably showier." "Which am I?" Harry asked. McGonagall almost smiled. It was a very small almost, but it was genuine. "Too early to say. Come to me if you need additional challenge. I suspect you will." He thanked her and left, and McGonagall stood alone in the Transfiguration classroom for a moment longer than she needed to, thinking about Lily Potter's eyes in a face that was entirely its own, and felt something complicated move through her chest. The defense against the dark arts classroom smelled of garlic. This, Hermione had read, was likely Professor Quirrell's doing. He had a thing about vampires, apparently, though by Harry's assessment the greater concern was the stammer, which was intermittent in a way that didn't quite map onto genuine anxiety, and the turban, which was large and faintly wrong in a way Harry couldn't articulate and had been sitting with since the welcome feast. "Today," Quirrell said, with the careful enunciation of someone working hard to keep their stutter at bay, "we will be discussing basic defensive theory. The history of shield charms. The foundational principles." He was still talking when Harry felt it. It was nothing like the warmth in his chest. That was clean and familiar and good. This was the opposite, a cold pressure behind his scar, the kind of sensation that made the survival hone part of his brain go very, very quiet and alert. Like a smell that triggers a memory you can't name. Like danger recognized before the mind has caught up. He looked at the back of Quirrell's head. The turban shifted slightly. Just slightly. Like something underneath it had moved. Harry looked at the turban for the rest of the class and said nothing and filed everything, and after class, when Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor, she looked at his face and said, "What?" "Quirrell," he said, low. "What about him?" "I don't know yet." He thought. "His turban is wrong." Hermione considered this with complete seriousness, which Harry appreciated. Someone else might have laughed or dismissed it. She turned it over. "The garlic could be a deflection," she said. "For what?" "I don't know yet either." She paused. "I'll start with the library." "Of course you will," Harry said, not unkindly. "There's nothing wrong with the library." "I know. I'm going with you." She looked at him sideways. "You don't have to." "Hermione." He stopped walking and turned to look at her fully, and there was something in his expression that was completely direct, none of the hedging she'd seen him use with Ron, none of the politeness he deployed like a shield. "Something in that classroom is wrong. You felt it too." "I could tell." She had. She hadn't mentioned it because she wasn't sure, but there'd been something, a dissonance in the magical atmosphere of the room, like a chord with one note badly off. "Yes," she said. "So we figure it out. Together." "Yes?" She thought about the face she'd been drawing in book margins for 2 years. The scar. The certainty. "Yes," she said. They found Fluffy by accident on the 3rd floor. It was a corridor they weren't supposed to be in, technically, though the door had been unlocked, which Harry felt said something about the school's security priorities, and the dog behind it was the size of a small car and had 3 heads, all of which were growling, and Hermione had grabbed Harry's arm before the door was fully open. They went still. 3 sets of eyes. 3 sets of teeth. The smell of something old and underground and kept. And under Fluffy's paws, a trapdoor. Harry closed the door. They stood in the corridor for a moment. "There's something under that dog," Hermione said. "Yes." "Something being guarded." "Yes." "That's related to Quirrell, isn't it?" "You think?" Harry looked at the door. His scar was quiet now, but the impression of the cold pressure remained, an outline without content, a shape he didn't have a name for yet. "I think," he said slowly, "that there's something in this school that someone wants very badly. And I think the someone is connected to Quirrell. And I think we should know what it is before whoever it is decides to come and get it." Hermione looked at him. "Harry. We're first years. We're 11. I know. You're not even a little bit scared, are you?" He thought about it honestly. "Not of the dog. Not of whatever's under it." He paused. "I'm a little worried about whoever's at the other end of the thing in Quirrell's turban. But worried is different from scared." Hermione stood in the corridor with the torchlight on her face and her magic quietly resonant against his, and looked at the door, and looked at him, and made a decision. "We need more information," she said. "Library," Harry agreed. "Now." They went. That night, in the dormitory, Harry lay awake in the dark and let himself feel what he'd been feeling for 3 days without fully examining it, the castle around him, alive and attentive, his magic stretched out into it like roots. The warmth in his chest, that was Hermione, 2 floors down in the girls' dormitory, still awake, reading, he was absolutely certain. He thought about the trapdoor. About Quirrell's turban. About the old cold pressure behind his scar. He thought about the Dursleys, the cupboard, the dead spider that had moved its legs. He pressed his hand flat against his chest the way he'd done at 9 years old in the dark, and the warmth pulsed once, familiar and clean and sure. Then, at the edge of what he could feel, not clear enough to name, not near enough to touch, something else. Fainter. Further. Warm in a different register, like the same song in a different key. A third note in a chord that had been waiting 2 years to become complete. Not yet, that warmth seemed to say, and Harry wasn't sure if it was his magic or something else entirely, something that would not arrive until it was ready. But soon. He closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, he slept without listening for footsteps. Across the castle, in the headmaster's office, Albus Dumbledore sat at his desk and looked at the instrument in the third cabinet from the left, the one that monitored a specific magical signature, the one he'd been watching since the day Harry Potter survived a killing curse. It was a delicate thing, spun glass and silver, and it had been doing something new for approximately 12 days. It was spinning faster. Dumbledore sat back in his chair and pressed his fingers together beneath his chin. He had a plan for Harry Potter. He had built it over 10 years with the care and patience that his critics would call cold and his admirers would call necessary. The boy would be shaped by adversity, made humble by circumstance, made dependent on guidance, and when the time came, he would go where Dumbledore needed him to go. The instrument spun. The boy was 11 days into his Hogwarts education and had already privately investigated the third-floor corridor, identified a magical anomaly in a member of staff, and formed what the instrument was reading as a significant magical bond with Hermione Granger. None of that was in the plan. Dumbledore was not afraid of 11-year-olds. But he was, in the privacy of his own office, with no one watching, a very small amount thoughtful. "Fawkes," he said. The phoenix on the perch opened one eye. "What do you make of him?" Fawkes made a sound that was not singing, softer than that, reflective, the kind of sound the phoenix made when he was forming an opinion. Then Fawkes turned his head away, which was as pointed a statement as any the bird had ever made. Dumbledore looked at the spinning instrument for a long time. "I see," he said, very quietly. Outside, the Scottish stars were doing what they always did, which was exist without asking anyone's permission, and somewhere in the castle, a boy who had spent 9 years in a cupboard stretched out in a real bed and slept like something that had found its ground. Chapter 3. The girl across the water. Beauxbatons Academy of Magic sat in the French Alps like something that had grown there, pale stone and arched windows and gardens that bloomed regardless of season because the magic threaded through the grounds was old enough to have opinions about aesthetics. The students who walked its corridors were, on the whole, better dressed than their British counterparts and marginally more likely to be discussing philosophy at breakfast, and the teaching staff operated on the principle that excellence was not an achievement but an expectation. Fleur Delacour had been exceeding expectations since she was 4. This was not, as most people assumed, because of her Vila heritage. The Vila charm was real. She'd watched it work on people, watched their eyes go slightly soft, watched them become agreeable and pleasant and stupid, and she had developed, in response to it, a thorough contempt for agreeable pleasantness and stupidity. What drove Fleur was something entirely separate from the warmth she radiated without trying. It was a fury, precise and well-maintained, at every person who looked at her face before they looked at her mind. She had arrived at Beauxbatons at 11 with a wand of rosewood and Vila hair, a transfiguration ability that made her third-year housemates go quiet with something that was almost resentment, and a feeling behind her sternum that had been there for 2 years and had recently gotten louder. Not painful. Never painful. Just insistent. "You are distracted again," said Apollon, not her mother, her charms instructor, who happened to share the name and a similar attitude about distraction, which was that it was a symptom of insufficient intellectual rigor. "I am thinking," Fleur corrected, without looking up from the charm she was constructing. It was an advanced variation on the basic shield charm, something that required simultaneous intention in 3 directions, and she had been working on it for 2 weeks because the textbook version felt inefficient and she was fairly certain she could improve it. About architecture, Fleur said, which was true in the sense that she was thinking about the structural framework of a magical shield, and also not true in every other sense. She was thinking about Harry. She didn't know his name yet. She knew his face the way she knew her own, not from experience, from something more fundamental, the kind of knowledge that lives below language. She knew the scar. She knew the feeling of his magic, which she had been sensing for 2 years at a distance, like radio signals from a very powerful transmitter, warm, enormous, unhurried, with a patience that she found simultaneously reassuring and infuriating, because she was not patient and she did not understand how anyone could be. She had not told anyone. Grandmere knew something, but Grandmere kept her own counsel with the serenity of someone who had decided that the universe was going to do what it was going to do, and the appropriate response was grace, which Fleur found deeply unhelpful as advice. She completed the shield charm. It held in all 3 directions simultaneously, clear as glass and twice as hard. Apollon looked at it for a moment. That's not the textbook variation. No. It's better than the textbook variation. Yes. Apollon was quiet. Then, show me the structural intention again. Fleur showed her. And her magic pulled, quietly and consistently, north and west, towards something it recognized and had never touched, and she breathed through it the way Grandmere had taught her, feel it, don't fight it, let it be what it is, and got on with being excellent. The night it changed from a pull to a conversation was a Wednesday in late October. Fleur had stayed late in the charms workroom because she'd been mid-breakthrough on the shield variation and hadn't wanted to stop, and by the time she walked back to the dormitory the corridor was quiet and the mountain air outside the windows was the particular sharp cold of almost November. She was tired in the good way, the way you get tired when you've worked your mind until it's pleasantly spent, and she walked with her robe draped over one arm and her hair loose and her guard down in the way you only let yourself when you're certain no one is watching. She was halfway up the 2nd staircase when it hit her. Not the warmth. Something sharper. A flash of stone corridor, torchlight, a door being pulled open, something large and 3-headed and furious, and a hand on an arm, not her hand, not her arm, and the quick, controlled assessment of a mind she knew better than she knew any mind she'd actually spoken to. She grabbed the banister. The image lasted 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Then it was gone, and she was standing on the Beauxbatons staircase in the dark with her heart going at a rate she considered undignified, and the warmth in her chest was doing something new, not the steady low hum she'd lived with for 2 years, but something active, almost communicative, like it was reporting back. He found something, she thought, and didn't know how she knew it was a he, except that she'd always known. He's not afraid of it. She stood on the staircase for a moment longer. Then she went up to the dormitory, sat on her bed, and thought carefully and precisely about what had just happened. Her magic had shown her something. Not a dream, she'd been fully awake. Not a hallucination, the details had been too specific, the sensory quality too clean. A genuine connection, crossing whatever distance separated her from him, she estimated England, based on 2 years of directional sense, and carrying information. Which meant the connection was strengthening. Which meant, if Grandmere's careful non-answers had contained anything useful, that she was running out of time before it became something she couldn't ignore. She pulled out parchment. Uncapped her ink. Grandmere, she wrote, I need you to tell me what you know. Not hints. Not patience. What you actually know. Something happened tonight and I am not a child anymore and I am tired of being managed. She sealed it, sent it with the dormitory owl, and lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. The warmth in her chest beat once, twice, steady as a second heartbeat. Que tu sois, she said softly to the ceiling, to the connection, to the boy with the scar she'd been drawing for 2 years, 2es uncomplication. Whoever you are a complication. The warmth, inexplicably, seemed to find this funny. Grandmere's reply came 4 days later and was 3 pages long, which Fleur read standing in the corridor outside the Ollery because she couldn't wait the additional 30 seconds it would take to find a chair. The relevant parts were these: there was a magical phenomenon, old enough that the textbooks disagreed about its origin, which occurred when 2 or more magical signatures achieved fundamental resonance, not compatibility, not attraction, but resonance, the specific harmonic that happened when separate magical cores were, at the deepest structural level, built from the same frequency. It was not a love bond, not precisely. The books called it by several names. Grandmere called it by the old Vila term, which translated approximately as the recognition that cannot be unfelt. Once it occurred, the magic on both sides became aware of the other. It would not let go. Not cruelly, it wouldn't prevent either party from living a full and separate life, but it would pull, consistently and without apology, toward completion. Like 2 halves of a tuning fork. It was rare. Grandmere had seen it twice in her 73 years, once in a pair who had found each other and once in a pair who had spent their entire lives pretending they hadn't, and the difference in outcome had been instructive. You felt it at 9, Grandmere had written. This is not unprecedented for those with Vila blood, because the Vila perception of resonance is more sensitive than human magic. But the one you are connected to is not Vila. He recognized it too, at 9, which means his core is extraordinarily sensitive, which means he is extraordinary in ways that have nothing to do with any reputation or prophecy or legend attached to him. Fleur stopped. Read that sentence again. Reputation or prophecy or legend. She thought about who she knew of in England who was 9 and had a prophecy attached to him. She said a word that would have made her mother's expression go very crisp. She read the rest of the letter. Grandmere confirmed it with the careful delicacy of someone diffusing something. The boy is Harry Potter, mon cœur. And before you decide what that means, remember that the magic did not choose him because of what happened to him at 1 year old. The magic chose him because of what he is. Those are different things. I would encourage you to keep them different. Fleur folded the letter. She stood in the corridor for a moment, looking at nothing. Then she went to her next class, which was Advanced Elemental Transfiguration, and she transfigured everything she was asked to transfigure and several things she wasn't, and she thought, with the systematic precision she applied to every problem that mattered, about how to handle something she hadn't chosen and wasn't going to run from. Back at Hogwarts, the months were turning. November brought Quidditch, which Harry had not been trying to get involved in and got involved in anyway when he caught Neville's Remembrall from a 60-foot freefall without a broom and landed it gently in McGonagall's waiting hands while most of the Gryffindor first years stood on the courtyard below making various sounds of distress. McGonagall had given him a look that contained multitudes and told him to report to Oliver Wood that afternoon. She made me seek her, Harry told Hermione, dropping into the chair across from her in the common room. Hermione looked up from her potions essay. I know. I watched from the window. You were 40 feet up. 50, I think. You weren't scared. It was interesting, Harry said. Falling is interesting. The wind does different things at different speeds. Hermione stared at him with the expression she developed specifically for Harry, which was composed of equal parts exasperation, affection, and the specific helplessness of someone who had given up trying to find him alarming. You're going to give me gray hair. You're 11. Prematurely, then. He grinned. It was one of his better ones, unguarded, genuine, the kind of smile that still surprised her because it didn't look like it belonged on the same face as all that quiet depth. Like suddenly finding a window in a wall you'd assumed was solid. The warmth between them was easy now, well worn over 2 months of shared library sessions and a running argument about the relative merits of theory versus practical application that neither of them intended to resolve because they both secretly enjoyed it. It had settled into something that lived in the background of everything, not intrusive, not demanding, just there, the way your own heartbeat is there. Quarrel, Hermione said, transitioning without preamble, because she had been thinking about it and there was no reason to ease into it. She had 17 feet of notes spread across the table. Harry leaned forward immediately. What did you find? The thing under the trapdoor. I've been cross-referencing restricted section texts. Don't give me that look, Madam Pants let me in, I asked nicely, and looking for whatever would require that level of protection. Something valuable enough for three-headed guard dogs and magical traps and, she paused. Harry, I think it's the Philosopher's Stone. Silence. Nicholas Flamel, she continued, pulling one of the parchment sheets forward. He's mentioned briefly in Magical Advances of the 15th century and in a footnote in Alchemical History and its Discontents, and in both places the stone is referenced as the most closely guarded magical object in existence. It creates the elixir of life. It's been stored at Gringotts for decades and was moved. I found a reference in the Prophet from last summer, a vault break-in that was reported as unsuccessful, moved here, Harry said. Before the school year started. After the attempted robbery. Yes. He sat back. The firelight caught the angles of his face, sharper than a child's, in some ways, all that watchful attention. So someone tried to steal it from Gringotts, failed, and now it's here, and Quirrell is, what? A second attempt? Or a continuation of the first? Hermione hesitated. Harry, who breaks into Gringotts? He thought about it. Someone who doesn't particularly care about consequences. Someone who thinks they're beyond consequences. Or someone who was powerful enough, once, that consequences weren't a concept that applied to them. Another silence. The fire crackled. Someone on the other side of the common room laughed at something, completely unaware of the conversation happening in the corner. Voldemort, Harry said, flatly, without the flinching and the euphemism that everyone else applied to the name. Several people nearby winced. Hermione didn't. He's not dead, Harry said. Not completely. Quirrell's turban. The cold behind my scar when he's near. That's what I think too. Hermione looked at her notes, then at him. We should tell Dumbledore. Harry was quiet for a moment. We could. But Dumbledore put the stone here. He knows about Quirrell, or he should, if he's paying attention. If he's not doing anything, Harry stopped. Turned something over in his head. Why would he not do anything? Hermione frowned. What do you mean? Dumbledore is not stupid. He's probably the most powerful wizard alive right now. If he wanted Quirrell gone, Quirrell would be gone. So either he doesn't know, or he does know and he's waiting for something, Hermione finished. They looked at each other. Waiting for what? Hermione asked. Harry didn't answer, because he had a shape of an answer that he didn't want to say out loud yet. He filed it away in the part of his mind where he kept things that needed more evidence before becoming conclusions. We find out more first, he said. And we're ready for whatever comes before we go to anyone. Hermione nodded slowly. All right. She started stacking her notes with the precise, efficient movements she used when she'd made a decision and was moving forward. In the meantime, you have Quidditch practice in the morning and I have an arithmancy problem set and we should both sleep. You're not taking arithmancy yet. I got the third-year textbook from the library. It's interesting. She stood. Good night, Harry. Good night, Hermione. She was halfway to the girls' staircase when she stopped and looked back at him. She had the expression she got sometimes, rare, unguarded, when she was about to say something she'd been sitting with for a while. I'm glad you were on that train, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said. Me too. In December, Fleur made a decision. She wrote him a letter. She was aware this was, from an outside perspective, a deeply strange thing to do. She had never met him. She did not know if he was aware of her the way she was aware of him, whether the pull was bilateral, whether the faint sense of his magic that she'd been receiving for 2 years had any correspondence on his end. She didn't know what she was going to say. She sat at her writing desk for 20 minutes with a blank piece of parchment, which was the longest she'd been stuck on a blank piece of parchment in her life. Then she wrote, "You don't know me. My name is Fleur Delacour and I am a student at Beauxbatons Academy in France. I have been feeling something for approximately 2 years, a warmth, a pull, a recognition that I cannot explain in any conventional terms but that has recently become active enough that I think you might be feeling it too. I want to be clear, I am not writing because I need anything from you. I am writing because I am tired of being curious about something I cannot investigate properly from this distance, and because my grandmother tells me patience is a virtue, which I find irritating. You have a scar. I know about it already. That is not why I am writing. Write back if you want to. If not, that is also acceptable." Fleur Delacour. She read it back. Decided it was appropriately direct and not embarrassing. Addressed it to Harry Potter, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry with the vague hope that the British magical postal system was competent. Sent it with the fastest owl available. Then she went back to her transfiguration and didn't think about it. She thought about it constantly. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, during breakfast, carried by a French owl that landed on the Gryffindor table with the bearing of an animal that knew it had come from somewhere better and was prepared to acknowledge Hogwarts only provisionally. Harry looked at the letter. French postmark. His name in handwriting that was precise and confident, each letter placed with the decisiveness of someone who had never second-guessed a pen stroke. He opened it. He read it. He read it again. Hermione, 3 seats down and already halfway through a bowl of porridge and 2 chapters of her herbology text, looked up at his expression. What? He handed it to her without speaking. She read it. He watched her face, the quick, thorough processing, the small frown of concentration, the moment her eyes widened slightly, the moment they steadied. She handed it back. She felt it too. Yes. From France. Yes. At 9. Same as us. He looked at the letter again. The handwriting. I am not writing because I need anything from you. Something in the phrasing struck him, a very specific kind of independence, the kind that announces itself because it's had to defend itself. He recognized it distantly the way you recognize a defensive posture. What are you going to say? Hermione asked. The truth. He reached for parchment. The same thing she said to me, that I felt it too, that I'm not scared of it, that I want to understand it. He paused. That there are 3 points in this, not 2. Hermione was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? About there being a third? Harry thought about the faint third note he'd felt that night in the dormitory, further, different keyed, but unmistakably part of the same chord. I think it makes sense, he said. The way a key has 3 notes in it and it sounds wrong without any of them. Hermione looked at her porridge. Something moved across her face that she was keeping deliberately still. That's a nice way to describe it. You're not threatened, Harry said. It wasn't a question. No, she said, and meant it. Are you? By what? By, I don't know. By the complication of it. He considered. No. I spent 9 years in a cupboard. I have a very high tolerance for complicated. He picked up his quill. Besides, something that's been pulling at 3 separate people for 2 years isn't going away because we ignore it. Might as well look at it. He wrote the letter. It took 10 minutes, which for Harry was a long time to sit still. When he was done, he read it back once and handed it to Hermione. She read it. Her expression did the quiet, unguarded thing again. It's good, she said. The part at the end, keep it, she said firmly. It's true. He sent the letter with the French owl, which received it with the air of something that had expected this and was already calculating travel time. Fleur received his letter on a Thursday evening, alone in the library, and read it 3 times. He had not flinched. Had not performed confusion or denial or the slightly aggressive skepticism she'd half prepared herself for. He'd simply described his experience with the same directness she'd tried to achieve in her own letter, the warmth at 9, the recognition, the way his magic had been pointing at something it couldn't reach. He'd told her about Hermione, not apologetically but as a fact, with the matter-of-factness of someone who considered context non-negotiable. "There's a third note in this," he'd written. "I don't think any of us chose it. But I think we can choose what to do with it. I'd like to understand it properly, and I think that probably starts with us talking. Write back when you want." And at the end, the part Hermione had told him to keep, "I don't know you yet. But I think I will. And I think when I do, it won't surprise me." Fleur sat with the letter in her lap for a moment. She was not a sentimental person. She was practical, precise, and had a low tolerance for people who mistook feeling things deeply for being governed by feelings. She had spent years cultivating the particular self-possession that being beautiful and powerful and underestimated required. But there was something in that last line, the simple, undefended certainty of it, that reached past the self-possession and touched something she didn't have a ready name for. She wrote back that night. Longer this time. She told him about Beau's batons, about the shield charm she'd been improving, about Grandmere's letter and what it had said. She told him about the flash of vision in October, the corridor, the three-headed dog, his hand on Hermione's arm, and described it with precise detail because she thought he'd want to know what she'd seen. She did not tell him that she'd been drawing his face in the margins of her own books for 2 years. That could wait. "Tell me about the school," she wrote near the end. "And tell me about this girl Hermione, who your magic considers its other half. I want to understand what I am walking into." She sent the letter at midnight, by moonlight, standing on the Beauxbatons terrace with the Alps enormous and cold around her, and her magic pointed north and west, steady as compass. The correspondence became something neither of them named. 2 letters a week, sometimes 3. Harry told Fleur about the castle, about Quidditch, about the growing certainty regarding Quirrell and the stone. He described Hermione with a directness that made Fleur, reading in the Beauxbatons library, feel she was seeing the shape of something real. "She approaches problems like a surgeon and arguments like a barrister, and she's the most genuinely curious person I've ever met. She reads ahead in everything. She already knows half of what we're supposed to learn this year." Hermione, who Harry had told about the correspondence and who had received this with the careful equilibrium of someone doing emotional algebra in real time, had begun adding postscripts to Harry's letters, short, precise, introductory, feeling out a connection across distance with the methodical care she applied to everything. Fleur wrote back to Hermione separately. Asked about the shield charm theory she'd been developing. Received, in return, 6 inches of parchment on alternative structural frameworks for defensive magic that was simultaneously the most technically impressive and most earnest thing Fleur had read all term. "She's brilliant," Fleur wrote to Harry. "Annoyingly so. I was prepared to be competitive and now I find I mostly want to compare notes, which is much less satisfying." "That's exactly what she does," Harry wrote back. "Welcome to it." The mountain troll arrived at Halloween like a bad punchline. The sequence of events was, the troll got into the school because Quirrell let it in, which Harry had suspected at the time and confirmed later. It headed for the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor. Hermione was in the girls' bathroom on the 2nd floor because Ron Weasley had said something thoughtless about her at breakfast and she'd been processing it with the particular wounded dignity of someone who knows they shouldn't care what someone says and cares anyway. Harry found out she was missing from the feast, turned to Ron, and said, "Which bathroom?" with a tone that cut through Ron's guilt like a blade. They ran. What happened in the bathroom was swift and messy. Harry went for the troll's club arm, got both hands on its wrist, drove his wand in at the joint and hit it with the knockback jinx twice in rapid succession while Ron did the Wingardium Leviosa on the club from behind and sent it clanging off the troll's own head. The troll went down. The bathroom was a ruin. Hermione was standing on top of a sink with her wand raised and a look on her face that was 1 part terror, 2 parts fury at having been caught in a state of terror. Harry looked at her. All right? Fine, she said, in a voice that was not fine but was rapidly becoming fine. Good. He looked at the troll. 12 feet, unconscious, bleeding slightly from its own club. He looked back at Hermione. Do you want to come off the sink? She came off the sink. Her legs were shaking slightly. She looked at the troll. At Harry. At Ron. You came, she said, which was a simple enough thing to say but came out weighted with something considerably more complex. Obviously, Harry said. McGonagall arrived 30 seconds later with Snape and Quirrell in tow, and Hermione, with a composure that genuinely surprised Ron, took responsibility for going after the troll herself. Harry let her, and later, when she asked him why, he said, because you offered, which means you thought it was the right thing to do, and I trust your judgment. Even when it's wrong? Especially then. Wrong judgments made for good reasons are worth more than right ones made for bad ones. She looked at him for a moment. Harry, she said. Yeah. I'm very glad the magic had good taste. He laughed, one of the real ones, brief and bright, and they walked back to the Gryffindor Tower with Ron trailing behind them, processing something he didn't have the vocabulary for but would think about for a long time. Fleur felt the troll event as a spike in the warmth, not pain, not alarm, but a sudden sharpening, the way a sound cuts through noise. She was in her dormitory when it happened, sitting up straight without knowing why, her magic arrowing north and west with unusual intensity for about 10 minutes and then settling back to its normal register. She wrote about it to Harry the next morning. Something happened last night. I felt it. Are you all right? His reply came 2 days later. Troll. We're fine. I'll explain properly next letter. Everyone okay? Everyone. Fleur noticed the plural. She had noticed, over 2 months of correspondence, how Harry used we almost exclusively, almost never just I, always inclusive, always with Hermione implicit or explicit. It was not the we of someone performing partnership. It was the we of someone for whom separateness had become genuinely strange. She thought about that, sitting in the French Alps with snow on the peaks and her magic pulling north and west, and wondered what it would feel like to be part of that we. She found she wanted to know. I will see you, she wrote at the end of her next letter. Not yet. But eventually. And when I do, I want you to understand that I am not coming because the magic pulled me there. I am coming because I have decided to. She sealed the letter. Her magic, apparently satisfied, hummed once and settled. Outside the window, snow was beginning to fall on the Alps, clean and unhurried, covering the sharp edges of the world in something soft, and Fleur Delacour sat at her desk and planned 3 years ahead with the thorough, precise attention of someone who had decided that what was coming would find her ready. Chapter 4, 3 points of a star. The summer between first and second year was the longest Harry had ever spent on Privet Drive, which was saying something given that he'd spent the entirety of his previous 10 summers there. The difference was that now he knew what he was missing. Before Hogwarts, the absence had been abstract. He'd known something was wrong with his life the way you know a room is cold without having a concept of warmth. Now he had the concept. Now he had Hermione's handwriting on parchment and Fleur's careful, precise French accented English in letters that arrived every 4 days without fail, and the cupboard was gone. He'd been moved to Dudley's second bedroom after McGonagall had sent a letter to the Dursleys that had made Aunt Petunia go the color of old chalk, but Privet Drive was still Privet Drive and the absence was considerably less abstract. He read. He practiced. He worked through the second-year curriculum on his own using the textbooks he'd bought on Diagon Alley, and then through the third-year curriculum, and then through several texts he'd purchased from the section of flourish and blots that the sales clerk had given him a slightly uncertain look about, as if reconsidering whether 11 was an appropriate age for advanced theoretical transfiguration and the principles of intent-based spell work. He wrote to Hermione every week. She wrote back longer. He wrote to Fleur every 4 days and she wrote back almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for the owl. In one letter Fleur had enclosed a diagram, meticulous, labeled in French with English translations added in smaller handwriting as an afterthought, of the shield charm modification she'd been working on. Hermione, to whom Harry had shown it, had filled an entire separate letter with response theory. Fleur's reply to that had been 3 pages of increasingly energized debate that ended with "Tell her I disagree with her on the third point, but she is fundamentally right about the framework and this is very annoying." Harry had passed this on verbatim. Hermione had looked quietly delighted in the particular way she did when she found someone she could argue with properly. The correspondence between all 3 of them had become its own ecosystem, Harry the consistent center, Hermione and Fleur orbiting slightly differently, finding their own direct current with increasing ease, all 3 of them building something that felt like architecture, like the deliberate construction of something that would hold weight. He trained. Every morning, before the Dursleys were awake, in the back garden with his wand and the second-year spellbook and, increasingly, a degree of improvisation that the books didn't quite cover. His magic was easier than it had been at Hogwarts, not because the environment was better, it wasn't, but because he understood it better now, understood that it wasn't a set of rules to follow but a language he was becoming fluent in. He didn't hide it. He didn't perform it. He simply used it, with the same straightforward attention he brought to everything. The Dursleys gave him a wide berth. This was new and not unwelcome. In July, a house elf appeared in his bedroom and told him not to return to Hogwarts. Harry sat up in bed, looked at the creature, genuinely strange, genuinely distressed, enormous eyes and a pillowcase and the air of someone who had made a very dramatic decision, and said, "What's your name?" "Dobby, sir." "Dobby the house elf." "Why don't you want me to go back to Hogwarts, Dobby?" "Because terrible things are being planned, sir." "Terrible things for the great Harry Potter and those close to him. Who's planning them?" Dobby's distress increased dramatically. He began hitting himself with a lamp. Harry, who had read about house elf behavior in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, watched this without alarm but reached over and moved the lamp out of reach on general principle. "Dobby cannot say, sir." "But Harry Potter must not go back, Dobby," Harry said, patient and direct. "I'm going back. I have friends there. I have work there. I'm not going to let someone's plan, whatever it is, decide where I go. If there's something dangerous coming, the best place for me is somewhere I can do something about it." He paused. "Who do you belong to? You don't have to say the name. Just tell me if they're connected to what's being planned." Dobby stared at him with the expression of someone who had prepared for many responses and not this one. "Yes," Dobby whispered. "Then the most useful thing you can do," Harry said, "is find ways to give me information when it matters. Can you do that?" Dobby seemed to be experiencing several emotions at once. "Harry Potter is not afraid?" "Of what exactly?" Of the danger, sir. Of the plans." "No." Harry settled back against his pillow. "But I'd like to know what they are. Will you help?" Dobby left an hour later in a state of profound emotional confusion that was, Harry estimated, significantly more useful than the imprisonment Dobby had apparently planned to engineer on Harry's behalf. The Chamber of Secrets announced itself in September with a cat and a message and 2 words that sent most of Hogwarts into a low-level collective panic. "Enemies of the air, beware. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened." Harry read the writing on the wall, literally, and felt his scar prickle, faint and cold, in a way that it hadn't since Quirrell. He looked at Hermione, who was reading the message with the expression of someone filing a very unpleasant thing. "Petrified," she said, about Mrs. Norris, who was hanging stiff from a torch bracket. "Not dead. Petrified is a separate spell, more complex, actually. This wasn't done in a panic. Someone prepared," Harry said. "Someone with access to a particular kind of venom," Hermione said, and there was something in the careful precision of how she said it that told him she'd already gone further down this line of thinking than she was ready to say aloud. "Tell me when you know more," he said. "Obviously," she said. The year escalated in the particular Hogwarts fashion, which was, Harry was beginning to understand, less a school and more a recurring test of character disguised as an academic institution. Lockhart arrived and was immediately both useless and entertaining, which Harry found marginally better than useless and boring. The dueling club gave him and Hermione an afternoon that they would later describe differently. Harry would say it was fine, Hermione would say it was extraordinary, when Harry produced a fully corporeal Patronus at 12 years old in response to a Dementor someone had accidentally let in during a poorly supervised third-floor revision session, and the silver stag that erupted from his wand was large enough that 3 Slytherin students had to step backward. "How?" said Hermione, not as a question, just as a response to reality. "I thought about something warm," Harry said. She looked at the stag. It was looking back at her. "What did you think about?" He met her eyes. "The handshake," he said. "On the train." She was quiet for a moment. The stag turned, moved through the corridor wall with the casual corporeal confidence of something that had every right to exist, and was gone. "You should not be able to do that," Hermione said, very carefully. "I know. The Patronus charm is N.E.W.T. level. Most adult wizards, I know, Hermione. I'm not criticizing, I'm documenting." She looked at where the stag had been. "Your core is doing something I don't have adequate theoretical framework for. Does it worry you?" She considered this with genuine thoughtfulness. "No," she said. "It just means my framework needs updating." He smiled. "That's a very you response." "Thank you," she said, meaning it completely. The basilisk was Hermione's salve. Harry would be clear about this forever, to anyone who asked. She had spent 3 weeks in the library cross-referencing obscure texts on magical creatures, Salazar Slytherin's known obsessions, and the specific nature of the petrifications, a mirror, something indirect, which rules out a direct gaze, which means movement not sight, which means victims saw it reflected or through something translucent, and arrived at his side one afternoon with a page torn from most magical serpents and their habits and a look of combined triumph and dread. "Basilisk," she said. "King of serpents. The only thing in the school capable of petrifying rather than killing is if someone's only been seeing its reflection or through a ghost, or, Harry. Harry, you speak Parseltongue. I found that out at the dueling club, yes. Slytherin's monster. Parseltongue. Harry, you can communicate with it." He sat with that for a moment. "I could potentially ask it to stop. You could potentially do considerably more than that. If the basilisk is being directed, controlled by whoever opened the chamber, you might be the only person who could reach it independently, outside of that control." "Reach it and do what?" "Talk to it first. Understand what it knows. It's been alive for 1,000 years, Harry. It was Slytherin's, it's been in those walls, it might know who's controlling it." "Or what?" She held his gaze. "I know you're going to say you'll go alone, I'm going to say we need more information first," he said. "And that when we go with a plan." Hermione blinked. "Oh. Did you think I was going to sprint into the chamber with no preparation?" "A little bit, yes." He gave her a look. "I've been training all summer. I have a plan. I just need 3 more days to complete it." She stared at him. "You've been planning this?" "Since the first petrification. I didn't know the specific threat, so I've been preparing for several. Basilisk was option 4 on my list." "You had a list." "You always have a list." She stopped. "That's fair." They didn't get the 3 days. Ginny Weasley was taken the following morning, and the message on the wall said her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever, and Harry looked at it for 10 seconds and then looked at Hermione. "Now," he said. "Now," she agreed. They found the entrance in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. Harry spoke to the sink, Parseltongue coming as naturally as English, which he'd given up being surprised about, and they went down. What happened in the Chamber of Secrets was not what a rescue was supposed to look like. Harry walked into the chamber, saw Ginny unconscious on the stone floor and Tom Riddle standing over her, beautiful and constructed and wrong, and felt his scar go cold and bright at the same time. Riddle smiled. Harry Potter. At last. Tom Riddle, Harry said. Or, Voldemort. It's the same thing, isn't it? Something flickered in Riddle's expression, surprised that Harry was using the name, that he was standing without flinching, that he'd walked into a 1,000-year-old snake's den with the energy of someone who had made a decision and was following it through. I'm going to kill you, Riddle said, still pleasant. But first I'd like you to watch. No, Harry said, and hit him with 3 spells in rapid succession, not standard classroom fare, not the Expelliarmus that Lockhart had been pushing all year, but a targeted disruption curse aimed at the diary's connection to Riddle's manifestation, a binding charm on Riddle's wand arm, and a targeted dispelling hex that Hermione had helped him refine over the summer from a text that was technically not on the approved reading list for any year group at Hogwarts. Riddle stumbled. Not stopped, the diary still pulsed with something dark and enormous, but stumbled, which was more than anyone had managed against a piece of Voldemort before. Hermione, Harry said. She had the basilisk under the Homorphous charm, incomplete, it wasn't designed for snakes, but enough to hold its direct gaze. She had found the entrance chamber's torch brackets and the angle required to prevent a fatal look, and she had done it in the 6 seconds between the entrance and now with the calm precision of someone who had prepared for this outcome. Harry spoke to the basilisk in Parseltongue. The conversation lasted 30 seconds. The basilisk was old and tired and had been controlled for 10 months and was, in the way of very old creatures given the chance to express preference, entirely willing to direct its attention elsewhere. Harry retrieved the diary from Riddle's conjured form, drove Gryffindor's sword, which had appeared in the sorting hat that Fawkes had brought, and which Harry had accepted without excessive astonishment because it felt like the sort of thing that would happen in this school, threw it once, cleanly. Riddle dissolved. Ginny gasped awake. Hermione released the basilisk. In the silence afterward, Ginny looked at Harry, then at Hermione, then at the dissolved remnants of Tom Riddle, and said, "Are you both all right?" "Yes," Harry said. You planned that?" "Mostly," Hermione said. "How long had you been planning it?" "Most of the year," Harry said. Ginny was quiet for a moment. "Dumbledore is going to have questions." "Probably," Harry agreed. He picked up Gryffindor's sword and looked at it. Solid, real, warm in his hand in a way that wasn't temperature. He handed it to Hermione. She took it with both hands, examined it, and handed it back. "Right," she said. "Let's go up." They went. Dumbledore had questions. He asked them in his office with the instrument spinning and Fawkes present and his expression doing the thing it did when he was working very hard to appear serene. He listened to Harry's account, complete, straightforward, nothing withheld, because Harry had decided early that the best way to handle Dumbledore was to give him accurate information and observe what he did with it. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. "You went into the chamber without notifying any member of staff," he said. "There wasn't time," Harry said. "And with respect, sir, the staff has been investigating petrifications for 4 months without identifying the threat. We identified it in 3 weeks." A silence. Dumbledore said. "Hermione solved the basilisk identification. I planned the intervention once we had the specifics." Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon glasses with an expression Harry had been studying for 2 years, the benevolent surface, the calculation underneath, the extraordinary intelligence turned on Harry like a gentle, inexorable spotlight. "You are," Dumbledore said carefully, "a remarkable young man." "Thank you," Harry said, "meaning I know what you're doing, I see it, and I'm choosing to let it pass." "I want you to know that you can come to me," Dumbledore said. "For anything. My door is always open." "I know that," Harry said, which was true, and also meant I notice you didn't apologize for not having found the threat yourself, which tells me something. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment longer than comfortable. 10 points to Gryffindor, he said. Each. Harry thanked him and left. In the corridor outside, Hermione was waiting. She read his face immediately. He's worried, she said. Not a question. About what I'm becoming, Harry said. About whether it fits his plan. What is his plan? I don't know the details yet. Harry looked back at the gargoyle guarding the staircase. But I intend to find out. Third year arrived with a Dementor on the Hogwarts Express and a new defense professor who was neither fraudulent nor a piece of Voldemort, which by Hogwarts standards was startling. Lupin had shabby robes and quiet intelligence and the kind of exhaustion that went deeper than sleep deprivation, and Harry liked him immediately, not with blind fondness but with the considered liking he extended to people who showed him they were honest. Lupin was honest in the particular way of someone who carried things they haven't told you yet but won't lie about what they have told you, and Harry respected that distinction. He also taught better than anyone Harry had encountered. Not because his material was harder but because he started from what students could actually do and built from there, which was apparently revolutionary at Hogwarts. The Dementor had tried Harry on the train and found him, not impervious. It had gotten close enough to drop him briefly into the worst memory he had, which was the green light and a woman's scream, but his Patronus had come automatically, the stag bright and immediate, and had driven the Dementor back before Lupin fully intervened. Lupin had looked at the stag with the expression of someone seeing something they'd been told about and finding the reality more significant. Hermione had looked at Harry with something careful on her face. That memory, she said, later. The one it pulled. My parents, he said. The night. He said it flatly, not because he didn't feel it but because the feeling was old and complex and he'd been living with it long enough to carry it without being carried by it. I'm sorry, she said. I know. She put her hand on his arm briefly and took it away, and that was all that needed to happen. The letter from Fleur came in October with unusual urgency. Something is happening here. Madame Maxime received an official communication from the International Confederation of Wizards 2 weeks ago and has been in correspondence with Dumbledore since. I have not been told what it concerns but the 4th and 5th year students are being prepared for something, and there is a great deal of talk among the older students about a competition that has not been held in many years. I am going to enter. I want to tell you this directly because I suspect you will be at the center of whatever happens and I would rather you know my plans than discover them. Also, tell Hermione I have revised my position on the 3rd-point structural framework. She was right. This is still annoying. Harry read the letter at breakfast and smiled without meaning to. Ron, who had been watching Harry's correspondence with Fleur with the escalating bewilderment of someone who knew something was happening but couldn't locate the edges of it, leaned over. Who's that from? Fleur Delacour, Harry said. Who? She's at Beauxbatons. 3rd year. How do you know someone at Beauxbatons? She wrote to me, Harry said simply, and went back to the letter. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at her porridge with the serenity of someone who had entirely made her peace with a situation and found Ron's confusion mildly entertaining. She's entering the Triwizard Tournament, Harry said, mostly to himself. Hermione looked up sharply. You knew about the tournament? Lupin mentioned something to me about upcoming changes to the curriculum. I've been putting pieces together. He folded Fleur's letter. Hogwarts hosts it this year. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang come here. Fleur will be here, Hermione said. Yes. They looked at each other. How do you feel? She asked. Ready, he said. She considered that. Me too, she said, with the careful honesty she brought to everything that mattered. The Beauxbatons carriages came in November, enormous, powder blue, pulled by winged horses the color of cream, and the Beauxbatons students filed into the great hall with the collective poise of people who had been told they were impressive often enough to have started believing it casually. Fleur Delacour was in the 3rd row. Harry had been watching the entrance with a stillness that Hermione, sitting beside him, clocked immediately. She tracked his gaze, found Fleur in the crowd, and looked back at him. He had gone very quiet. Not tense, not the held-in small person quiet of early first year. This was a different kind of stillness, the kind of a deep chord being struck. Across the hall, Fleur had stopped walking. Not noticeably, not in a way that disrupted the flow of the group, she was too composed for that. Just a half-second pause, almost imperceptible, that meant she'd found what she was looking for. Her eyes moved through the Gryffindor table. Passed along the first years, the second years, moved to the third rows. Found Harry. Harry looked at Fleur Delacour for the first time in person, across the length of the Hogwarts Great Hall, and felt the third note of the chord resolve. Not loudly. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic, it was the absence of strain, the way a sound you've been living under stops, and you only notice it was there because of how quiet the world is without it. 3 years of a warmth pointing at something it couldn't reach, and now the distance was gone. Fleur's chin lifted very slightly. Her expression did not change, but her eyes were silver-gray and entirely steady, and what was in them was recognition. Harry inclined his head. Just barely. She inclined hers in return, with a precision and self-possession that meant I see you, I came, I am not made uncertain by any of this, and moved forward with the Beauxbatons group. Hermione, who had been watching both of them, let out a breath. Well, she said. Yes, Harry agreed. She's extraordinary. I thought you might think so. She's also going to be absolutely insufferable to argue with. Almost certainly. Hermione straightened her cutlery with unnecessary precision. Good, she said, meaning it. Fleur found him after the feast. Not dramatically, not a sweeping corridor encounter with appropriate lighting, she was too sensible for that. She simply appeared at his shoulder as he was leaving the great hall, fell into step beside him, and said, in accented English that was precise and barely accented at all, "You are shorter than I expected." Harry looked at her sideways. "Hello to you too." The corner of her mouth moved. "Hello, Harry Potter." Fleur Delacour. They walked in silence for 3 steps, which felt less like awkwardness and more like two people finding the rhythm of something. The letters were, she started. Yes, he said. I was going to finish. You were going to say they were useful and then decide that wasn't the right word and then not say the right word because you'd need more time to find it. Yes? She stopped walking. Turned to look at him with an expression that was precise assessment and, underneath it, something genuinely startled. Grandmere said you were perceptive, she said. You wrote about her often. I feel like I know her a bit. She wants to meet you. I'd like that. He said it simply, without performance. Fleur looked at him for another moment. The great hall emptied around them, students streaming past, and neither of them moved. The magic, she said, dropping her voice slightly, not because she was ashamed of it, Harry understood immediately, but because it was theirs and didn't need to be public. You feel it now? Now that I'm here? Yes. He put a hand briefly against his sternum, the same gesture he'd made at 9 in the cupboard, and she watched it with the recognition of someone who had made the same gesture countless times. It's complete, now. Like a chord that was 2 notes for 3 years. 3 notes, she corrected. You forgot Hermione. I didn't forget. She's the reason the chord was 2 notes for 3 years instead of 1. He paused. She's the first part of this that made sense. You're the part that makes it whole. Fleur was quiet. Her expression was doing something complex and still. That, she said finally, was a very good thing to say. I meant it. I know. That's why it was good. She looked away, along the corridor, gathering something. I want to be clear about certain things. I did not come to Hogwarts for this, for you. I came because the tournament is a genuine competition and I intend to win it. My participating in, whatever this is, does not change what I am here to do. I know, Harry said. I wouldn't want it to. She looked back at him. No? You came because you chose to. That matters more than the pull. If you'd shown up and just, given over to the magic, expected it to do the work, I'd have been considerably less interested. He held her gaze. I wrote to you because you were interesting. The warmth got my attention. You kept it. Fleur was still for a moment. Then she said, I am going to go find Hermione Granger. She's in the library. Third alcove on the left, she likes the lamplight. Of course she is. Fleur started walking, then stopped. Harry. Yeah. For the record. She turned. You are not shorter than I expected. I wanted to see what you would do with that. Harry laughed, full and genuine. And? Acceptable, she said, and walked away with the unhurried certainty of someone who had established everything she needed to establish. Harry stood in the corridor and felt 3 separate threads of warmth in his chest, distinct and complementary and entirely without precedent, and thought that the universe had very peculiar taste in timing. In the library, in the third alcove on the left, Hermione heard footsteps and looked up from her arithmancy text and saw a girl with silver-gray eyes and Beauxbatons robes stop in the entrance to the alcove. Hermione Granger, Fleur said. Fleur Delacour, Hermione said. Silence. Harry said you revised your position on the third-point framework, Hermione said. Something in Fleur's expression shifted, the composed self-possession cracking open slightly into something that looked, briefly, like delight. He told you immediately. He knew I'd want to know. Fleur sat down across from her without being invited, pulled the arithmancy text toward her without asking, and looked at it. This is 3rd year? Yes. I'm on 5th year equivalent. She pushed it back. Tell me about your structural framework theory. From the beginning. I have been thinking about it all month and I think you're right that the conventional approach is inefficient, but I want to understand your reasoning from first principles. Hermione stared at her. We can do the other thing, Fleur said, with a gesture toward the space between them that meant the magic, the bond, the 3 of us, another time. Right now I want to know if your theory holds under scrutiny. Hermione closed her arithmancy text, opened her spell theory notebook, and began. An hour later they were both leaning over the same parchment, talking rapidly, and the warmth in Hermione's chest had settled into a frequency that was different from Harry's note but harmonized with it, and she thought distantly that the magic had, indeed, had very good taste. The goblet of fire stood in the entrance hall, ancient and blue-flamed and unimpressed by anyone who walked past it. Students submitted their names with varying degrees of ceremony. Fleur submitted hers with the calm of someone who had already decided the outcome. Harry watched the goblet from across the hall and did not submit his name, because he was 13 and not permitted, because rules that existed for safety reasons rather than power reasons were rules he was willing to follow. He was standing there when Dumbledore appeared beside him with the silent arrival that Harry had decided was deliberate, an old man's reminder of capability. Not entering, Harry. I'm too young, Harry said. There are those who believe age is merely a restriction to be worked around. Dumbledore's voice was mild and warm and measured. And there are those who believe if you can't win fairly you haven't really won. Harry looked at the goblet. Besides, I'll be involved anyway. These things tend to include me whether I plan for it or not. A pause. You sound quite certain of that. 3 years at this school, Harry said. Pattern recognition. Dumbledore made a sound that might have been a laugh. And if something beyond pattern recognition were to involve you, if the goblet were to name you despite the age restriction, then I'd compete, Harry said. And I'd win. But that's hypothetical. He met Dumbledore's eyes directly, which he'd noticed made the old man recalibrate slightly every time. Isn't it, sir? Dumbledore held his gaze for a moment. Quite, he said, and moved away. Harry watched him go. Pattern recognition, he thought. The goblet burned blue in the dark of the entrance hall, and the night before the selection ceremony, Harry sat with Hermione and Fleur in the library, Fleur between them, the three of them spread across a single table with texts and tea and the easy collaborative shorthand they'd been building for weeks, and thought that whatever came next, it would not find him unprepared. "If you get selected," Fleur said to him, not looking up from her book. "I won't be," Harry said. "I didn't enter." "If," she repeated. "Then I'll deal with it." "We will deal with it," Hermione said, from behind her copy of Advanced Magical Theory. Fleur's mouth moved. "We," she said, trying the word out in English, finding it accurate. "We," Harry confirmed. Outside, the Scottish autumn wind moved through the grounds and the torches along the castle walls burned steady against it, and in the library the three of them read in comfortable silence with their magic in easy resonance, 3 frequencies in 1 chord, complete. Chapter 5, What the Tether Holds. The Goblet of Fire spat out 4 names. Everyone knew there should be 3. Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, the hall erupted, Hufflepuff loudest, warm and genuine. Victor Krum for Durmstrang, restrained applause, Krum himself standing with the stillness of someone who had expected this. Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons, she rose with a composure that made half the room hold their breath, caught Harry's eyes across the hall for 1 fraction of a second, and walked forward. Then the goblet burned red one final time and Dumbledore caught the name and read it, and the silence before he spoke was the kind that has weight. "Harry Potter." Harry didn't move. The hall turned to look at him. 400 faces, various expressions, shock, excitement, suspicion, the particular Hogwarts combination of all 3. Hermione, beside him, went very still. Under the table her hand found his wrist, not gripping, just contact, just "I'm here." Harry stood up. He walked to the front of the hall without hurrying, without performing anything. He was 14 years old and he walked through the staring hall like someone who had simply decided this was what was happening now and had already moved on to thinking about what came next. He caught Dumbledore's eyes as he passed and held them for just long enough to say, wordlessly, "I know this wasn't an accident and we will be discussing it." Dumbledore's expression flickered. "Almost nothing." Harry caught it. The champion's room was tense and strange. Cedric nodded at him with the generous uncertainty of someone who wasn't sure what to think yet. Krum looked at him with the flat assessment of a professional evaluating a variable. Fleur was standing with her arms crossed and her expression closed, and when Harry came in she looked at him with something sharp. "You entered," she said, low and French-clipped. "I didn't," he said. She read him. She was good at it by now. 3 months of correspondence and 4 weeks in person had given her a vocabulary for his face that most people didn't have. She found what she was looking for. "No," she said. "You didn't. Someone put my name in. Someone who wanted you in the tournament." Her voice was low and precise. "Someone who wanted you bound by a magical contract and placed in deliberate danger." "Yes." "Do you know who?" "I have a shape of it." "No details yet." She was quiet for a moment. "Be careful what you accept as given," she said. "This competition is being used for something. The tasks are not what they appear." "I know." "Do you?" "Fleur." He met her eyes directly. "I've been in this school for 3 years. Everything here that appears to be one thing is something else. This is not my first time in dangerous circumstances that someone else arranged for me." He paused. "But thank you for saying it." "You're right to say it." She looked at him for a moment longer. The sharpness in her expression shifted into something more complex. "We need a strategy." "We need information first," Harry said. "Strategy second." "Hermione," Fleur said, with the tone of someone identifying a resource. "Already thinking about it, I guarantee." The champion's door opened and the adults filed in, Dumbledore, Maxime, Karkaroff, Crouch, Bagman, and the conversation became formal and layered and full of things left unsaid, and Harry stood through it and listened and filed every detail and did not miss the way Karkaroff's eyes kept sliding to him with an expression that was specifically and distinctly not the way anyone should look at a 14-year-old. Hermione had 17 theories by midnight. Harry and Fleur sat across from her in the room of requirement, which Harry had found in second year and used extensively since, and which tonight had configured itself into something that looked like a very well-stocked study, and listened to her work through them with the systematic precision that meant she was close to something. "The goblet is not sentient," she said, pacing, which she did when she was thinking at full speed. "It doesn't have judgment in the complex sense. It selects based on submission criteria, intent, eligibility, magical resonance with the charter. To force it to produce a fourth name, you'd need to confound it or create a second charter that superseded the first, something that convinced the goblet it was selecting from a fourth school." "Moody could do that," Harry said. "Theoretically." Hermione and Fleur both looked at him. "He arrived this year. He's the only new variable. He's also off." Harry turned his wand over in his fingers. "The same way Quirrell was off. Different signature, but the same quality of wrongness." "Wrongness how?" Fleur asked. "Like someone wearing a person rather than being them." Harry looked at the fire the room had provided. "I've been watching him since September. His magical signature fluctuates. Real aurors, experienced ones, their magic has a consistency, a pattern you develop over years of use. His doesn't. It's variable in a way that suggests the core producing it is not always the same core." Hermione stared at him. "Polyjuice potion. That's my guess." "Who's inside?" "Death Eater." Harry said it flatly. "Someone with enough knowledge of Moody to maintain the cover and enough access to have done this. Someone who wanted me in the tournament." He paused. "Which brings us back to Voldemort. He wasn't destroyed in the chamber. The diary was a piece of him, a fragment. There are others. He's been reforming." The fire crackled. Outside the room of requirement, Hogwarts went about its sleeping business. "The tournament tasks," Fleur said. "If whoever is doing this needs you to complete them, then the final task is a transport," Harry said. "Something that moves me to wherever he needs me. A port key in the maze, probably." Silence. "You've been thinking about this all year," Hermione said. "Since Dobby warned me in second year that someone was planning things," Harry said. "I've had time. You didn't tell me all of it. I told you the parts that were certain. This part was still inference." He met her eyes. "I'm telling you now." She held his gaze for a moment. Not angry, assessing. Filing. Recalibrating. "All right," she said. "So the question is whether you play along and use it against them, or whether you expose it before the final task." "The question," Harry said, "is what happens if I expose it too early and whoever's orchestrating this switches to a plan I don't know the shape of yet. At least this way I can see it coming." "You're going to let yourself be port-keyed," Fleur said. Not a question. Not quite accusation. The tone of someone who had already processed the conclusion and was verifying the logic. "I'm going to be ready when it happens," Harry said. "That's different." "Not enormously different." "Enormously different. One is passive. One is prepared." Fleur looked at him for a long moment. In the firelight her expression was unguarded in a way it rarely was, the composed silver-gray surface of her gone, and underneath it something fiercer and more honest. "You are going to a graveyard," she said, very quietly. "Alone." "Not if I can help it." "You said yourself, I said I'd be ready. I didn't say I'd be alone." He looked at both of them. "I need two things from both of you. First, help me prepare for the tasks. I want to go in better than I would be otherwise. Second, when the final task comes, I need you both ready for whatever comes after, because what comes after is going to be significant and I'd rather not face it without backup." "Define backup," Hermione said. "You," Harry said. "Both of you. Whatever comes next, after the graveyard, after Voldemort, I don't want to do any of it without you." The fire made the room warm and the shadows moved and the three of them sat with that for a moment, the weight of it, the honesty of it. "All right," Hermione said. "Then we start tonight. The first task is dragons. Let's talk about dragons." Fleur made a sound that was briefly, genuinely amused despite everything. "She goes straight to the work." "Always," Harry said, with considerable fondness. "It's one of her best qualities." The dragons were magnificent and terrible. Harry stood in the enclosure with the Hungarian horntail 40 feet away and his wand in his hand and the warmth in his chest steady and deliberate, and thought about the 3 weeks of preparation they'd put in, Hermione's comprehensive research on dragon behavior and weaknesses, Fleur's contribution of a shield charm variation she'd been developing since she was 11 that could hold against dragon fire at close range, Harry's own training in the specific kind of aerial agility that catching a golden egg from a dragon's nest required. He did not summon his broom the way Cedric, Krum, and Fleur had each done. He'd considered it and decided against it, not because he couldn't, but because a broom gave the dragon a moving target it could track. He needed the dragon looking at one thing while he moved as something else entirely. He conjured a decoy. Not a human figure, something that moved the way a dragon's prey moved, something warm to the thermal senses, something that would hold the horntail's attention for 45 seconds. It was a transfiguration he'd spent 6 days perfecting with McGonagall, who had looked at the application and said nothing for 4 full seconds before helping him refine it with a precision that suggested she found the strategic thinking personally satisfying. The horntail took the bait. Harry moved. He crossed the enclosure in a low running arc, inside the dragon's rear sweep radius where it couldn't comfortably track him, reached the nest in 22 seconds, and had the golden egg and was moving away before the horntail had fully registered the decoy's disappearance. What happened next was that the horntail turned faster than the research had suggested was possible and hit him with a wing strike that sent him sideways and airborne, and Harry did 3 things simultaneously in the air, activated Fleur's shield charm modification that he'd been practicing for 2 weeks, cast the arresting charm that stopped his lateral velocity, and redirected into a controlled descent that put him down on the far side of the enclosure with his legs under him and the egg in his hand and the shield charm absorbing the heat of the fire that followed him down. He stood up. Looked at the dragon. The dragon looked at him. He walked to the exit with the egg under his arm. The crowd noise took a moment to reach him, it seemed to have been doing something during that last sequence, reaching some kind of crescendo that he'd been too occupied to track. He walked through the gate and found Hermione and Fleur waiting, which they were not supposed to be. Champions waited separately, which meant they had moved through whatever administrative arrangement kept them separated, and the expressions on their faces were the particular expressions of people who had been holding their breath for the last 40 seconds. Hermione grabbed his arm. "The wing strike, I'm fine," he said. The shield held. She checked his arm anyway. He let her. Her hands were thorough and quick and the warmth in his chest was bright with her proximity after the tension of the enclosure. "The shield held perfectly," she said, and there was something in her voice that was fierce and a little raw. "Your 3-point framework was the key," he said. She looked up. "Fleur's modification," she corrected. "My theory," Fleur said, from his other side, and her voice was studiedly neutral in a way that meant she was doing something careful with her expression. She was looking at his arm where Hermione's hand still rested. "Are you hurt?" "No. You took a full horntail wing strike." "The shield was designed for fire," Fleur said. "Not impact. You should be bruised at minimum." She stepped closer, raised her own hand, and cast a diagnostic charm with the practiced ease of someone who had learned combat healing theory because the theory existed and learning it was simply what you did. "No fractures," she said, after a moment. "Bruising consistent with a significant impact." Not dangerous. I'll take it, Harry said. She lowered her hand. Their eyes met. The third note in the chord was warm and steady. Next time, she said, anticipate the secondary response time. The research said 48 seconds for the horntail's tracking adjustment. It was closer to 38. Noted, Harry said. How was your task? I retrieved the egg. A pause. My shield performed adequately. Just adequately? Her mouth moved. Extremely well, she said. I didn't want to be insufferable about it. Since when? She met his eyes and the corner of her mouth lifted fully and she looked, for a moment, exactly as young as she was, which Harry had noticed she rarely let herself appear. Since you made me care what someone thought of my humility, she said, and walked away before he could respond to that. The egg screamed. Every champion had one. Every champion opened it and flinched from the noise and spent the intervening weeks trying to decode what it meant, because it was a clue to the second task and the clue was encrypted and the encryption was, by design, frustrating. Harry opened his in the room of requirement on the second evening and Hermione had her hands over her ears and Fleur had her wand raised on instinct before Harry closed it again. It needs water, Harry said. They both looked at him. The sound. It's a frequency issue. This isn't meant to be heard in air. He turned the egg over. It's a murmish sound. You need to submerge it. How did you? Hermione started. Fleur, he said. You've heard murmish before. Fleur had gone still. My grandmother's estate is near the coast. There are mere people in the deep water. I have heard the above-surface version before, yes. I didn't, she paused. I didn't connect it. You were busy flinching, Harry said, not unkindly. Shall we find a bath? The prefect's bathroom was available. They submerged the egg and listened to the song and Harry followed the murmish with the same natural ease he'd followed Parseltongue, which made Hermione look at him with an expression that was somewhere between I really need to update my theoretical framework and this is the most interesting person I have ever met. Something precious taken. Retrieve it in an hour. Below the lake. They'll take something important to each champion, Hermione said. Or someone, Harry said. Who? Fleur asked. Harry thought about the people at Hogwarts who mattered to him. The list was short and specific and he looked at both of them and something crossed his face, not fear, just the clean recognition of a vulnerability he was willing to acknowledge. Fleur caught it. They won't take me, she said. I'm a champion. There are rules, there are supposed to be rules about fourth champions too, Harry said. Silence. Ron, Hermione said quietly. It'll be Ron, for you. He's your closest male friend and the magic will read that. For me, she stopped. I don't know. Perhaps a parent. It doesn't matter who, Harry said. We get everyone out. That's the plan. The rules say 1 hour, Fleur said. Each champion, the rules say retrieve your person. They don't say leave everyone else. Harry looked at both of them. Are either of you going to argue that point? Neither of them did. The lake in February was the temperature of something that had not received the memo that living things required warmth. Harry went under without gillyweed, he'd considered it and decided that plant-based transformation was limiting in a way he didn't want to be limited, and cast the bubblehead charm with enough modification to allow for deep pressure and temperature regulation, which was not standard charm theory but was a logical extension of the original principle and had taken him 3 weeks of library work and 2 lengthy consultations with Hermione to develop properly. He found the Mere People village in 22 minutes. 4 figures, unconscious, suspended from a stone structure by kelp chains, Ron, Hermione's mother. Harry felt a spike of cold recognition. They'd taken her mother out of London. The range of this was larger than he'd estimated, a Durmstrang student he identified as Crumb's friend, and Fleur's younger sister Gabrielle, whose face was serene and small and 8 years old. He cut all 4 free. He didn't hesitate. He cut all 4 free and got them moving upward and cast the warming charm series and got everyone to the surface with 4 minutes left on the hour and came up out of the lake gasping and cold in a way that reached the bones. Ron spluttered immediately. "Harry, you absolute." Later, Harry said. Hermione's mother, coming back to consciousness, looked at Harry with the wide eyes of someone processing an extraordinary quantity of information at once. You're Harry, yes. Are you all right?" I'm wet and I was apparently at the bottom of a lake, yes. I'm sorry about that. It wasn't my plan." He helped her to the bank. Hermione was already there. She had come in from the side, having been retrieved by Harry before the champions entered the water, and now she was on her knees beside her mother making sounds that were the Hermione equivalent of frantic, which was rapid quiet reassurance rather than noise. Her composure had cracked completely in the way it only did when something touched something real. Fleur came up near the bank 10 minutes after Harry, pale and shaking and with Gabrielle held against her chest in a grip that was not letting go. Gabrielle was fine, all the hostages were fine, the enchantment was designed for stasis not harm, but Fleur's face was doing something Harry had not seen it do before, stripped entirely of the composed silver surface down to something younger and more raw. She found his eyes over Gabrielle's head. He held her gaze. "She was fine," he said quietly. "I cut her free. She was fine the whole time." Fleur pressed her face into Gabrielle's hair and said something in French that Harry didn't catch but understood. Gabrielle, who was 8 and perceptive, leaned back and looked at Harry with enormous dark eyes. "C'est Louis?" she asked her sister. "Is that him?" Fleur made a muffled sound that might have been yes. Gabrielle looked at Harry with a solemn, evaluating expression that was almost exactly Fleur's. "Merci," she said. "De rien," Harry said. Fleur pulled back from Gabrielle and looked at Harry, and what was in her eyes then was nothing like the composed assessment she usually offered. It was simpler and more absolute. "You cut all 4 free," she said. "Yes. You weren't required, Fleur." He met her eyes. "Were you?" A long pause. "No," she said. "Then we agree on what required means." He stood up. "Let's get inside. It's cold." The maze came in June. Harry walked into it with Cedric on his left and the warmth in his chest steady as a compass bearing, and what waited inside was not what anyone had announced. The maze was wrong from the first turn, not because of the obstacles, those were straightforward enough, but because of the atmosphere, a pervasive magical pressure that grew heavier as they went deeper, something that made Cedric's face go tight and uncertain and made Harry's scar throb with the cold precision he'd been tracking all year. He and Cedric had come to a quiet understanding in the weeks before the final task, not alliance exactly, but mutual respect, 2 people who had both decided they were going to be honest with each other because the alternative was worse. Cedric was good. Not powerful in the way Harry was powerful, not strategic in the deep forward-planning way, but genuinely decent and brave in the way that didn't require an audience. "Something's wrong with this maze," Cedric said, after the 3rd turn. "Yes," Harry said. "Stay close." The obstacles were dispatched efficiently. A blast ended Scrut redirected. A boggart, Harry's took the form of Voldemort, which he dispersed without ceremony before it fully formed, because he'd faced the real thing twice and the imitation didn't have sufficient information to be frightening. A sphinx, whose riddle they solved between them in 40 seconds because Hermione had spent a week making Harry go through logic puzzles at speed. The golden cup stood at the center of the maze, and Harry felt the portkey enchantment on it from 30 feet away. He stopped. Cedric almost walked into him. "What, the cup?" Harry said. "It's a portkey." Cedric stared at it. "What?" "It's how they get me where they need me. Touch it and we're transported." Harry stood very still, thinking fast. He'd prepared for this. He'd spent 4 months preparing for this. He looked at Cedric. "You should go back." "Harry," Cedric. Direct and clear. Whatever's at the other end of that portkey is not a school competition. It's Voldemort. Go back and get Dumbledore. Tell him what I told you, portkey, transport, graveyard most likely. Tell him I went knowing what it was. Cedric's face was white. I'm not leaving you, you're not useful there. You will be here. Harry held his gaze. You're a good person, Cedric. Don't die for someone else's plan. A long moment. Cedric stood with his jaw set and his eyes bright, and Harry could see him fighting between what he wanted to do and what made sense, and then he said, "Come back." Planning on it, Harry said, and touched the cup. The graveyard. A headstone with the name Riddle. The old caretaker Wormtail, small and furtive and smelling of fear and old betrayal. The bundle of something wrapped in black cloth that Harry recognized immediately as what Voldemort had been reduced to, a fragment, a clinging remnant, not yet embodied. Harry was on his feet when the portkey deposited him. He had his wand up before Wormtail registered his presence. He put 3 binding spells on Wormtail in the first 2 seconds that pinned him to the headstone with a precision that made the small man make sounds of genuine distress, and then Harry turned to face the bundle of cloth and its container, and his scar lit up like a struck match. "You're faster than he said," the bundle said. The voice was thin and cold and ancient and wrong. Not a human voice. Not yet. "Tom," Harry said. "You look terrible." A pause. "Kill, if you want to kill me, you need a body," Harry said. "And to get a body you need Wormtail, who is currently unavailable." He moved laterally, keeping distance, his magic fully deployed, not just defensive, not just reactive, but active and extended like radar, reading the graveyard's magical geography. "I'm going to be honest with you. I've known this was coming since October. I've been preparing. How you proceed from here is going to determine how the next few minutes go. You think," the voice hissed, "that a child can threaten." "I think," Harry said, "that I've already defeated you twice. Once when I was 1, which admittedly wasn't me. Once when I was 12, which was. I'm curious what the third time looks like." The bundle moved. Harry felt the dark magic surge, Wormtail struggling against the bindings with a strength that wasn't natural, that was being fed, and Harry hit him with the additional binding before the arm came free and Wormtail fell still with a groan. "You need his hand," Harry said. "The ritual needs a willing servant's flesh." He looked at Wormtail. "He doesn't look very willing right now." What happened next happened fast. The bundle of Voldemort made a decision that Harry felt as a shift in magical pressure before it manifested, a reaching for something, a contingency, and Harry was already moving when the green light came from a different direction entirely. Not from the bundle. From a tombstone 20 feet to the left. Death Eaters. Several of them, operating in with the crack of coordinated arrival. Harry moved without thinking, flat, low, behind the Riddle headstone, already constructing the shield complex that Hermione and Fleur had spent 2 months helping him build into something that could hold against multiple simultaneous offensive spells. The shield held. Just. He was 14 years old, alone in a graveyard, against what he estimated at 6 Death Eaters and a dormant fragment of Voldemort. He thought about Hermione in the library, her hands moving over parchment. He thought about Fleur on the Beauxbatons terrace in December, her magic pointed north. He thought about the warmth in his chest that was both of them, steady and present and alive. Then he stopped thinking about any of that and started working. He took down the first 2 Death Eaters with a precision that surprised them, targeted, specific, non-lethal but completely incapacitating, the kind of magic that left people on the ground and unable to aim. The third tried to flank him and Harry redirected without breaking the shield complex, which he was maintaining with his left hand's intent while his right hand worked defense, which was not standard wand technique but was something he'd been developing with the understanding that standard technique was designed for one thing at a time. The 4th Death Eater hit him. Got through a gap in the shield where Harry had overextended the defensive radius, and the cutting curse caught his forearm and Harry registered pain as information, not serious, nothing structural, keep moving, and rolled behind a different headstone and came up in a new position. He looked at his forearm. Bleeding, not badly. He pressed his sleeve to it and kept the shield up. The bundle of Voldemort had gone silent. That was, Harry thought, potentially worse than when it had been talking. Then he felt it. The warmth in his chest went from steady to urgent, and a crack of apparition sounded from behind him, and then two more, and Harry spun. Hermione. Fleur. And behind them, Dumbledore. Harry stared. Hermione's expression was the face of someone who had been terrified for the past 20 minutes and was channeling it into something functional. Fleur had her wand out and her eyes were doing a rapid strategic sweep of the graveyard with the efficiency of someone who had not arrived without a plan. "You came," Harry said. Obviously, Hermione said, which was his word, had always been his word, and she said it back to him with fierce precision and moved immediately to his left. "Cedric sent word," Fleur said, moving right, covering his blind angle without being asked. "We had a port key prepared. We have been prepared for this since February." She glanced at his arm. "You're bleeding." "Aware. Hold the position." "Hermione, the shield anchor, already on it," Hermione said. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not a fight in the traditional sense. It was 3 people who had spent months preparing for a specific threat, operating with the shorthand of people who knew how the others moved and thought, and it was 6 Death Eaters who had expected one 14-year-old boy. The Death Eaters had severely miscalculated. Harry took the offensive, Hermione held the defensive anchor in the way they developed and practiced. Her capacity for simultaneous complex spellwork was extraordinary, always had been, and the shield framework she could maintain was something most adult aurors couldn't manage, and Fleur moved with a fluid tactical aggression that had clearly been trained rather than natural, each spell precise and purposeful and effective. Dumbledore contained the wider threat with the quiet devastation of a man who hadn't needed to demonstrate his power in 15 years and was doing so now with the economy of someone who found it faintly sad. 4 minutes. 5 Death Eaters incapacitated, 1 fled. Wormtail still bound. The bundle of Voldemort silent. The graveyard was still. Harry lowered his wand. He was breathing hard, bleeding from his forearm, and his magical reserves had the particular warm hollow feeling of something significantly drawn on. His legs were steady. Hermione crossed the graveyard in 4 steps and grabbed his uninjured arm and checked his face with both hands, close and direct and not performing anything. "Tell me where you're hurt." "Exactly." "Forearm, left side." "That's all." She checked the arm. Her hands were shaking slightly, which she was working very hard to control. "It's not deep. It needs attention but it's not dangerous." "Good." "Harry." She was still holding his arm, looking at him, and something in her face was open in a way he didn't often get to see, the Hermione below the competence, the one who felt things with the same intensity she thought things. "You were down here alone." "Not for long," he said. "Too long." "Hermione, no." She held his gaze. "Too long." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She held his gaze for another moment and then let out a breath and stepped back and reassembled her composure with visible deliberateness. Fleur was standing 3 feet away, watching this with her arms crossed and an expression that was doing several things at once. When Harry met her eyes she looked away first, toward the bound Wormtail, toward the silent bundle, toward Dumbledore, who was standing apart from all 3 of them and watching Harry with an expression Harry had been waiting to see all year. It was the expression of someone whose plan had just visibly not gone the way it was supposed to. Harry walked to Dumbledore. "Sir," he said. "Harry." Dumbledore's voice was warm and careful. "You were very brave tonight." "I was prepared tonight," Harry said. "There's a difference." He looked at the old man steadily. "You knew. About the port key. About what Crouch, the false Moody, was doing. You had suspicions." A careful pause. I had concerns. And your plan was to let it play out. My plan was to ensure you were capable of handling whatever you encountered, Dumbledore said, and the extraordinary thing was that he wasn't entirely lying, there was genuine care in it, genuine belief in his own reasoning, which made it considerably more complicated than a simple lie. And if I hadn't been capable? Harry asked. Dumbledore was quiet. If I'd come here alone and not prepared and not had two people with me who love me enough to follow me into a graveyard, Harry said, still quietly, what was the contingency? Harry, I need you to understand something. Harry held the old man's eyes. He was not angry. Anger was loud and he was done being loud about things that required clarity. I am not a piece on your board. I am not a strategy. I am not the weapon you shaped by keeping me small and dependent and grateful. He paused. I know what you want me to be. I've known for a long time. And I'm telling you now, clearly and directly, that it isn't going to work that way. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. What moved through the old man's face was complicated, pride and grief and calculation and something that was, if Harry read it correctly, genuine surprise. Not at the challenge. At the clarity. At a 14-year-old boy who spoke without flinching and meant every word. You are, Dumbledore said finally, very quietly, very much like your mother. Harry considered that. I'll take it, he said. The tether held. That was what Harry thought about, later, sitting in the hospital wing with Madame Pomfrey working on his arm and Hermione on his left and Fleur on his right, both of them there despite having no official reason to be, both of them staying because neither of them had any intention of leaving. The magic had recognized something when he was 9 in a cupboard, and again in Bristol, and again in the south of France. Had pointed 3 separate people at each other across years and distance and without explanation. Had refused, with quiet absolute certainty, to let any of them go. He understood it now, sitting here. It wasn't destiny. It wasn't fate in the heavy prophetic sense that Dumbledore operated by. It was simpler than that. It was the recognition of something real. The magic had looked at 3 people and found what they were at the core, not what had been done to them, not what they were supposed to be, but what they actually were, and it had said these frequencies belonged together with the plain confidence of physics. And it had been right. Hermione was reading, because she was always reading, but she had moved her chair close enough that their shoulders were touching, and every few minutes she looked up from the page and checked that he was still there. Fleur was not pretending to do anything else, she was sitting straight-backed and present, her hands folded, her eyes on the middle distance, processing something in the patient thorough way she processed things she'd decided mattered. The tournament is over, Harry said to neither of them in particular. Yes, Hermione said. Voldemort needs a body still. He'll find another way. Yes, Fleur said. This was the opening move. Not the game. We know, they said, almost simultaneously, and the almost at once of it made the corner of Fleur's mouth move and Hermione look at her across Harry and something passed between them, a look he'd seen them exchange with increasing frequency, the look of 2 people who had developed their own shorthand for the experience of knowing him. We're going to have to fight, Harry said. Properly. Not just this. We know, Hermione said again, and her voice was steady and sure. Are you asking if we're in? Fleur asked. He looked at her. Then at Hermione. He didn't have a good excuse for asking, they'd already demonstrated the answer in a graveyard 40 minutes ago. No, he said. Fleur nodded once. Good. Hermione closed her book, which meant the conversation was serious, and looked at both of them. We need a better plan than reactive, she said. If Voldemort is reforming, if Dumbledore is going to continue managing rather than acting, if the Ministry is going to spend the next year denying everything, we need to be ahead of it. We need our own infrastructure, Harry said. Not dependent on Dumbledore's. Not dependent on the Ministry. Allies, Fleur said. People who will listen to the truth. Resources, Hermione said. The Potter vaults, Harry, you haven't even, I know. We'll look at everything properly this summer. Beaux Batons will let me return, Fleur said. But I am going to petition Madame Maxime to complete my 7th year here. At Hogwarts. There are things coming that I will not be useful for from France. Harry looked at her. Don't make a face, she said. I'm not making a face. You are making a face. I'm making a face because you just decided to uproot your entire academic career and you said it like you were announcing the weather. It is a practical decision, Fleur said, with complete composure. It's more than practical, Harry said. A pause. Something moved in her expression. Yes, she said. It is. Does that concern you? He held her eyes. The third note of the chord. The thing the warmth had been pointing at across 3 years of distance. No, he said. It doesn't concern me at all. Fleur turned her face away, just slightly, but not before he saw the small, real, unguarded smile, the one that had nothing to do with composure or self-possession and everything to do with something she'd decided to let herself feel. Hermione, between them, looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who was determinedly minding their own business but was also, quietly, entirely happy. Outside the hospital wing, the tournament was being officially closed, the champions congratulated, the delegations prepared for departure. Inside, the 3 of them sat in the warm pool of lamplight and planned the next thing, and the next, and the thing after that, and the magic in Harry's chest beat steady and true and whole. 3 notes. 1 chord. Unbroken. Chapter 6. No one owns the fire. The summer after the tournament was the last summer Harry Potter spent at Privet Drive. He knew it before he'd been there a week. Not because of a decision, the decision came later, structured and deliberate, but because Privet Drive had stopped being capable of containing him in any meaningful way. The house was the same. The Dursleys were the same, in the way of people who had fossilized around a particular shape of themselves years ago and couldn't change now without shattering. What had changed was Harry, and the change was not subtle enough to pretend around anymore. He trained every morning in the back garden before the street woke up. Not hiding it. Not performing it. Just working, with the focused economy of someone who had stood in a graveyard against 6 Death Eaters and found both his preparation sufficient and his preparation wanting, and intended to close the gap between those 2 things before the next time. His magic had grown over the summer in the way of something given proper room. Not explosively, it wasn't that kind of growth, it wasn't showy or sudden. It was the quiet, structural expansion of something removing the constraints it had built around itself for years of survival. Like a tree that had been growing in a container finally put in ground. He wrote to Hermione every day. She wrote back longer, always, her letters crammed with research and theory and the occasional sharp observation about something she'd been thinking through, and underneath all of it, running like a current, the easy familiar warmth of someone he'd built something with and didn't need to explain himself to. He wrote to Fleur every 4 days. She wrote back within hours. Her letters had changed over the year, the first ones had been careful and precise, feeling out distance and parameters, everything structured like a well-argued position. These were different. Still precise, Fleur was constitutionally incapable of imprecision, but the precision was in service of honesty now rather than defense. She told him about her petition to Madame Maxime, which had been granted with conditions. She told him about Grandmere, who had apparently said about time when informed of the plan, which Fleur described with audible irritation. She told him about Gabrielle, who had decided that Harry was her favorite person and was making this known with an 8-year-old's complete indifference to whether this was convenient. In July, Dumbledore sent a letter. Harry read it at the kitchen table while Aunt Petunia made a pointed exercise of not looking at him. The letter was warm and careful and full of the particular layered quality of Dumbledore's communications, the surface offering advice and gentle guidance, the underneath moving pieces Harry was supposed to be too young to see. Dumbledore wanted him to remain at Privet Drive for protection purposes. The Blood Wards. Lily's sacrifice, still active, still binding. It was, as arguments went, not without merit. Harry had read enough about sacrificial magic to know the wards were real and functionally significant. It was also, as arguments went, the kind that conveniently kept Harry isolated, dependent, and accessible. Harry wrote back. He was courteous. He was direct. He told Dumbledore that he understood the logic of the blood wards and had given it genuine consideration, and that he had also given genuine consideration to the fact that a graveyard full of Death Eaters had known his location with enough precision to arrange a portkey delivery, which suggested the ward's practical protective value was somewhat less absolute than presented. He told Dumbledore that he would be staying with the Grangers for the remainder of the summer. He told Dumbledore that he looked forward to their next conversation. He sealed the letter, sent it, and went back to training. The Granger house in Bristol was everything Privet Drive wasn't, which was to say it was warm and full of books and operated on the principle that a person's intelligence was worth engaging rather than managing. Hermione's parents, dentists, both, with the particular kind of grounded pragmatism that comes from years of talking people through things they didn't want to face, had adjusted to the magical world with the thoroughness of people who had decided if their daughter was going to be part of it then they were going to understand it properly. They had questions. Specific, well-researched questions, the kind that suggested they had been preparing since the Hogwarts letter arrived. Harry answered every one of them completely, because he respected people who did their homework and because he'd decided that the Grangers deserved full information about what their daughter was involved in. Dr. Granger, David, he said, on the second evening, with the ease of someone who had decided formality was inefficient, looked at Harry across the dinner table after he'd given a clear-eyed account of the tournament, the graveyard, and what was coming, and said, "You're not frightened." "Not exactly," Harry said. "What does not exactly mean?" "It means I'm appropriately concerned about specific threats. But I've been in danger since I was 1 year old. I don't have a useful version of being frightened. I have a useful version of being prepared." David Granger looked at him for a long moment. "Hermione said you were," he paused, chose the word carefully. "Remarkable. She says that about most things she finds interesting," Harry said. "It's a compliment when she means it the way she means it about transfiguration theory." Hermione, without looking up from her book, said, "I'm sitting right here." "I know," Harry said. Dr. Granger's mouth moved. He looked at his wife across the table. Some kind of parental communication occurred in the 2 seconds of eye contact between them. "You can stay as long as you need," Helen Granger said. Harry had not been expecting that particular phrasing. He looked at her. She met his eyes with the calm directness of a woman who had raised Hermione Granger and was therefore not going to pretend she hadn't noticed things. "As long as you need," she repeated. "Not as a guest. As, whatever the appropriate word is." The warmth in Harry's chest was complicated and real. "Thank you," he said. Fleur arrived on the 14th of August. She came by portkey to the end of the Granger Street. Madame Maxime had arranged it, and Harry and Hermione met her at the corner and she was exactly as she always was, composed, precise, silver-grey and certain, and carrying a bag that somehow looked elegant despite being clearly overpacked. She looked at Harry. Then at Hermione. Then at the quiet Bristol street with its reasonable houses and its reasonable gardens. "This is very English," she said. "Yes," Hermione said. "I expected more, grey." "It's August," Harry said. "I expected more grey even in August." She lifted her bag. "Well. Where am I staying?" The Grangers had offered the spare room without being asked. Helen Granger had, with the instincts of someone who had been tracking developments in her daughter's life for 3 years, simply said, "There's a room," when Hermione mentioned Fleur might visit, and the matter had been settled. The first evening was the strangest and the most natural thing Harry had experienced since the train. The 3 of them in Hermione's kitchen, late, with tea and parchment and the particular energy of people who had been building something at a distance and were now finally in the same room doing it. Hermione had been compiling research for months, on Horcruxes, which she'd arrived at through arithmancy and historical dark arts theory and a long chain of inference that Harry had followed with the focused attention of someone recognizing something important being put into words for the first time. Soul magic, Hermione said, spreading parchment across the kitchen table. The most fundamentally illegal dark magic that exists. Not because of what it does externally, though that's catastrophic, but because of what it requires internally. You have to perform an act of deliberate murder and channel the rupture in your own soul into an object. She looked at them both. Voldemort has done it more than once. How many times? Fleur asked. Arithmancy suggests 7 as an intended number. There's a mathematical elegance to 7 in soul division theory, each fracture approximately halves the remaining whole, so the numbers are meaningful rather than arbitrary. She turned a page. We've already destroyed 2. The diary, 2nd year. The ring, she stopped. Dumbledore destroyed the ring. Last summer. I found a reference in the Prophet about an injury to his hand. He's been hunting them, Harry said. He's been hunting them alone, Hermione said, and the emphasis was pointed. Without telling anyone. Managing the information the way he manages everything. 5 more, Fleur said. Potentially. I have working theories on the locket. There's an account of Slytherin's locket in several historical texts that matches what I'd expect from a Horcrux description. A cup associated with Helga Hufflepuff. Something of Ravenclaw's, likely. Nagini, his snake, Harry said immediately. Yes. And, Hermione paused. She looked at Harry with an expression that was the careful face of someone about to say something that had been sitting with her for a long time. Harry. The scar. Silence. I've been running the arithmancy for months, Hermione said. The numbers keep producing the same result. A soul fragment attached to a living person would behave exactly like what your scar does, the pain near Voldemort, the emotional connection, the Parseltongue. A fragment anchoring itself to a magical core at the moment of the killing curse's failure. Harry sat with that. You think I'm a Horcrux, he said. I think you contain one. Unintentionally created. And I think, she took a careful breath. I think Dumbledore knows. And I think his plan for you has always accounted for it. Fleur was very still. Harry thought about Dumbledore's plan. The pieces he'd been assembling for 3 years, the shape of them, the thing he hadn't wanted to name aloud because naming it made it real. A weapon shaped by adversity. A boy made willing. Walking forward at the necessary moment. He thinks I need to die, Harry said. To destroy the fragment, yes. Hermione's voice was steady and clear, and he loved her for the steadiness of it, for not softening it into something easier. That's his working theory. That's why he needs you ready and willing and trusting. And does the arithmancy agree with him? Harry asked. Hermione was quiet for one specific moment. The arithmancy says a soul fragment can be extracted, she said. It hasn't been done. The theory exists but the practice doesn't. But the mathematics don't require the host to die, they require the fragment to be separated from the host. Those are different things. Harry looked at her. You found a way. I have a theoretical framework, she said carefully. It would require significant development. Time and resources and, how long? With all 3 of us working on it? 18 months. Maybe less. Then that's what we do, Harry said. Fleur put her hand flat on the table. Before we discuss the fragment, the other Horcruxes. If we develop the extraction method and destroy the fragment but the others remain, Voldemort survives. We do it in parallel, Harry said. We find them, we develop the method, we do everything at once when we're ready. He looked at both of them. On our terms. Not Dumbledore's timeline. Not Voldemort's. Ours. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the Bristol night was warm and ordinary. We're going to need more than 3 people, Hermione said. Yes. We're going to need to trust people outside this room. Yes. Carefully. Remus Lupin, she said. He was your father's friend. He's honest. Sirius Black, Harry said. Hermione blinked. He's innocent. I know, I'll explain the full story later, but he's innocent and he's my godfather and he's been living rough since the escape. He needs help and we could use him. The Weasley twins, Fleur said, and both of them looked at her. She lifted an eyebrow. Don't look at me like that. Fred and George Weasley are the most magically creative people in that school outside of this room. They understand magic intuitively in ways that books can't entirely teach. If we are building something that operates outside of official channels, we want people who understand how to work outside of official channels. Harry thought about it. Yes, he said. And Neville. Neville Longbottom? Hermione looked uncertain. He's more capable than he thinks, Harry said. He's been held back by expectations his entire life. The right environment and he's extraordinary. I've watched him in herbology, his instincts are remarkable. Hermione considered. Nodded. All right. Luna Lovegood, Fleur said. Who? Harry asked. She's a Ravenclaw, starts her 4th year with us. I have read about her. Observed at the tournament. She sees things differently, not in the unfocused way people dismiss, but in the way that generates insights conventional thinking misses. Those people are valuable. You researched a Ravenclaw 4th year, Hermione said. I research everyone at that school. Fleur was entirely unapologetic. It seemed wise. Harry looked between them and felt the cord in his chest warm and complete. Then that's who we start with, he said. And we build from there. 5th year began with Dolores Umbridge, which was its own particular variety of catastrophic. Harry had known she was coming. He'd had Hermione track the ministry appointments over the summer and the pattern had been clear: Fudge's increasing paranoia about Dumbledore, the ministry's institutional need to control the narrative around Voldemort's return, the obvious solution of installing someone loyal in the school. Umbridge arrived with her pink cardigan and her toad smile and her absolute conviction that power was the same thing as authority, and Harry looked at her across the Great Hall on the first night and thought 2 things. First, that she was genuinely dangerous in the specific way of people who believe their cruelty is justice, and second, that she had absolutely no idea what she had walked into. He was correct on both counts. She banned him from Quidditch first, which was annoying but tactical. She was looking for compliance, for a reaction that would let her frame him as volatile. He declined to provide it. He showed up to her class and sat at the back and was entirely pleasant and answered her theoretical questions with complete accuracy while making it clear by the quality of his answers that he found the course material approximately 2 years below his actual level. The blood quill appeared in the 3rd week. She had detention with him for stating in class, calmly and directly, that Voldemort had returned. Not angrily, not theatrically, he had simply answered her question about the previous year with complete accuracy and watched her expression go through surprise to calculation to decision. The detention involved a quill that cut words into the back of his hand. Umbridge watched him write and waited for flinching and got none. Harry wrote "I must not tell lies" in his own blood with the same even expression he'd carried into a dragon enclosure and a graveyard, and when he finished she looked at his face and something uncertain moved through hers for just a moment. He held up his hand. Looked at it. Put it down. "May I go?" he asked. She let him go. Outside the office, Hermione took one look at his hand and went very still. Her magic, which was generally warm and steady, sharpened to something cold and precise. "She did that," Hermione said. "Yes. I'm going to. There are several legal remedies, Hermione." He waited until she looked at him. "I know what you want to do. And the instinct is right. But going to the ministry means going to Fudge, who put her here. Going to the prophet means Skeeter, who is compromised. Going through official channels is what she's counting on because she controls the official channels. He paused. We use this. She's shown us what she is. We let her show the rest of the school. Hermione looked at his hand for another moment. You're not going back to that office alone. I'm not planning to. I mean ever. I'll find a way to be there. Hermione, I'll find a way, she said, in the voice that meant this was not a negotiation. He looked at her for a moment. Okay, he said. Okay. She took his hand carefully and cast the healing charm with a focus that meant she was also working through something, and Harry let her, and the warmth between them was fierce and real. Fleur found them 10 minutes later in the corridor. She took one look at Harry's hand, now healed but still faintly marked, and looked at Hermione. Something passed between them in the fraction of a second that required no words. The woman is going to escalate, Fleur said. Yes, Harry said. Which is fine. Explain fine. She escalates, more people see what she is, more people are ready to act when we need them. He looked at the healed back of his hand. She's not the threat. She's the symptom. The threat is the ministry's willingness to deny what's coming. We need to move faster on the training group, Hermione said. The training group, Dumbledore's army, as Fred Weasley had named it with the grin of someone who understood exactly what they were doing, had been Harry's idea and Hermione's architecture and Fleur's insistence on quality over quantity. They had begun meeting in the room of requirement in October, 23 students, and Harry had been teaching them the way Lupin had taught him, from where they actually were, building to where they needed to be, with the honest assessment that what they were practicing for was real and the real thing was coming. He taught them how to cast a Patronus. Not theoretically. Actually. He stood in front of 23 people and demonstrated and corrected and stayed until Neville produced a silvery flash at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, and the expression on Neville's face was something that would stay with Harry as long as he lived, genuine astonishment at his own capability, the look of someone discovering that the walls around them had been external all along. Luna, who saw things differently and was therefore entirely correct about things that conventional thinking missed, had told Harry in their third session that his magical core felt like standing near a very old fire. Harry had found this accurate and touching in equal measure. Luna had then said that the Raxburts around Umbridge were unusually dense, which Harry suspected was a metaphor for something true even if the Raxburts themselves were debatable. Fleur taught them precision. She had a ruthless standard for the quality of a spell, not power, precision, the ability to place a hex exactly where intended under pressure, and she held the group to it without apology. Several students resented this initially. By November they were casting better than their year level and had stopped resenting it. Hermione taught them theory, because understanding why a spell worked made you better at making it work when the circumstances weren't ideal. She taught it the way she'd learned it, from first principles, with the enthusiasm of someone who found the architecture of magic genuinely beautiful, and the group learned things the curriculum hadn't reached yet and wouldn't for years. Ginny Weasley turned out to be devastatingly talented. Ron, who had been coasting on natural ability for 4 years, discovered in November that natural ability required direction and started working properly for the first time. The twins contributed variations and inventions that occasionally surprised even Harry. Neville grew steadily, session by session, into someone who was going to be formidable. They were building something. Something real and not dependent on Dumbledore's permission or the Ministry's approval or anyone's plan except their own. Dumbledore was removed from Hogwarts in January by Ministry decree following the discovery of what Umbridge characterized as an illegal student organization. He went without resistance, which Harry watched from across the courtyard and found more telling than anything else the old man had done, the smile, the ease, the small nod in Harry's direction as he left. The nod said, "I trust you to handle this." Harry thought, that's not your decision to make anymore. Umbridge took control of the school. She made it worse, which had always been the plan, not Harry's plan. He wasn't arranging her failures, but her failures were inevitable because her method of control required compliance and the school she was trying to control had been carefully, quietly, over 4 months of Tuesday evenings and early mornings, made thoroughly uncompliable. Fred and George Weasley detonated 2 months' worth of Weasley's Wizard Wheezes products across 3 floors on a Wednesday afternoon and left on broomsticks through an upper window, and the image of them going, unhurried, grinning, trailing fireworks, was one of the more purely joyful things Harry had watched at Hogwarts. Peeves, emboldened, escalated. Umbridge put her head in her hands during what Harry estimated was her 3rd staff meeting of the day and was almost certainly losing. He felt no satisfaction in it. She was a symptom and the disease was still active. He kept working. The Department of Mysteries happened because Harry saw Sirius in a vision and didn't think clearly about who else could have arranged for him to see exactly that. He knew this afterward. He knew it in the 3-minute gap between the vision and the moment Hermione grabbed his arm in the corridor and said, "Wait. Think about this carefully." He stopped. He looked at her. "The vision," she said. "Sirius, captured, tortured. In the Department of Mysteries." "Yes." "Have you checked if Sirius is actually at Grimmauld Place?" He hadn't. He looked at Fleur, who was on his other side. She had the expression of someone who had reached the same conclusion half a second ago. He reached out with his magic, not a spell, just the extension he'd been developing since 2nd year, the ability to reach his awareness along the warmth of connections he'd established. Sirius had been at Grimmauld Place all year, a familiar magical signature, and he reached for it, there. Present. Alive. Not in pain. Harry stood in the corridor for a moment. "He's fine," he said. Then the vision was planted, Hermione said. "Voldemort." Harry thought through it rapidly. "He's had access to my mind, the fragment, the connection. He can push images. He did it without me realizing." He paused. "He wants me in the Department of Mysteries. There's something there he needs." "The prophecy," Fleur said. They both looked at her. "I have been reading about the Hall of Prophecy. There is a record there, your name on it, made before you were born. He needs you to retrieve it because only the person named in it can remove it from the shelf." She looked at Harry with the steady precision she brought to every difficult thing. "He will know his plan failed if you do not go. He will adapt. Unless we make him think it worked," Harry said. They went to the Department of Mysteries, not blindly, not in a rush, but prepared, 3 of them and Neville and Ginny and Luna and Ron, because that was the group that was available and willing, and Harry had learned that you worked with what you had and you made it enough. What they found was a hall of prophecies and 6 Death Eaters and a trap that had been designed for one 14-year-old boy and had been given instead a group of people who had spent a year preparing for exactly this quality of situation. The fight in the Department of Mysteries was loud and strange and happened in a place where time moved differently and physical laws applied with unusual interpretability, and Harry moved through it the way he moved through everything, present, responsive, not afraid of anything specific enough to freeze him. He caught the prophecy. He used it. He told Neville what it said with the calm clarity of someone removing a weight from a shelf: "He must kill or be killed, born as the 7th month dies, power the Dark Lord knows not." "Power he doesn't know," Neville said, slightly breathless, after an encounter with a Death Eater mask that Hermione had transfigured around someone's head with elegant ruthlessness. "Love," Harry said. "Apparently." He caught Hermione's eyes across the hall. "Though I'd argue it's slightly more complicated than the standard definition." Hermione, while simultaneously maintaining a shield complex around 3 people, managed to give him a look that was very fond and slightly exasperated and entirely herself. The order arrived. Sirius, and the others. And Voldemort, finally, fully embodied, in the atrium, and Dumbledore, because of course Dumbledore came for this, had probably always been watching for exactly this moment. Harry stood in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic and watched Dumbledore duel Lord Voldemort and felt, for the first time since the graveyard, the full weight of the cold pressure behind his scar. Voldemort was trying to get in. Had been trying all year. The fragment calling to its origin. Harry closed the door. Not with a clemency, which Snape had been teaching him in the particular unhelpful way of someone who resented the student more than they valued the lesson. Harry had learned a clemency the same way he'd learned everything else that mattered, by understanding the principle and applying it with his own hands, and the principle was not a blank wall, not emptiness, not the cold hard nothing that Snape described. It was the opposite. It was warmth, specific and real, the chord in his chest, 3 notes together, and the fragment could not take hold of something that full, something that lit from inside. He closed the door. Voldemort recoiled from the heat of it. And then Voldemort was gone, and there were 50 ministry officials and journalists standing in the atrium looking at the evidence of what they'd been denying for a year, and Harry stood in the middle of it with Hermione on one side and Fleur on the other and the prophecy sphere in pieces on the floor, and decided that he was done waiting for anyone else to frame what happened next. Dumbledore took him to the office afterward. He explained everything. The Horcrux Harry didn't name as such but knew now was confirmed. The prophecy, both of their relationship to it. The plan Dumbledore had built over 15 years, the network, the moves, the reason for Privet Drive, all of it laid out with the earnestness of a man who had been carrying it alone for too long and had perhaps never fully accounted for the possibility that the subject of the plan would understand it completely. Harry listened to all of it. "You were going to send me to die," he said, when Dumbledore had finished. "I was going to ensure that when the time came, you would be prepared to die," Harry said. "That's the plan. Walk into Voldemort and die to destroy the fragment." "Yes?" Dumbledore was quiet. "It's not a bad plan," Harry said. "Given incomplete information, given the assumption that Horcrux extraction was impossible, given a 15-year-old framework that predates me knowing any of the relevant theory." He held Dumbledore's eyes. "But the information is no longer incomplete and the assumption is wrong and I'm asking you to update the plan. Harry, we have a method." He said it plainly. "Hermione developed it. Fleur and I have been stress testing the theory for 8 months. It works. We can extract the fragment without killing me." He paused. "It will take another 6 months to make the method safe enough to use. But it works." Dumbledore was still. "I need your help for 6 months, Harry said. The remaining Horcruxes, I need access to what you know, what you found, where the others are. In exchange, you get the outcome you've been building for, Voldemort destroyed, the fragment gone, the prophecy fulfilled." He paused. "And I don't have to die to do it. Which is better, I think you'll agree, than the alternative." Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. "You are 15 years old," he said, not dismissively, with something closer to wonder. "Yes," Harry said. "What does my age have to do with whether the plan works?" A pause that lasted long enough to feel like a decision being made. "The locket," Dumbledore said, "is in a cave on the coast. I will take you." "Take all 3 of us," Harry said. "Harry, all 3 of us," he repeated. "Not a negotiation." Dumbledore looked at him. Looked away. Looked back. "Very well," he said. "The extraction happened in February of 6th year. 6 months of development, of refinement, of Hermione going through the theory with a precision that had taken her beyond anything the Hogwarts curriculum offered and into territory that 3 unspeakables had apparently attempted and failed at, none of which discouraged her at all. 6 months of Harry learning to locate the fragment not as part of himself but as a separate thing, an intruder with a distinct signature, something that could be identified and separated if you had the right hands for it. The room they used was in Grimmauld Place, Sirius's house, which had been cleaned and opened and made into something livable by collective effort over the previous summer. Sirius himself had spent 6 months preparing the space with the focused attention of someone given something useful to do after years of powerless waiting. Lupin was present, for medical support. Sirius was present because he wasn't leaving. The twins were downstairs because they had insisted and no one had the energy to argue. Fleur anchored the left side of the working. Hermione took the right. Harry sat between them on a chair that felt absurdly ordinary for the circumstance, and the three of them placed their hands, Hermione's on his right forearm, Fleur's on his left, both of them touching the points where their own magic met his most readily, and began. What followed was 30 minutes of the most technically complex magic Harry had ever participated in, and he had spent the previous 6 months learning to participate in it precisely, and it was still at the outer edge of what the three of them could hold together. Hermione's concentration was absolute, he could feel it through the contact, the diamond-sharp focus of her at full capacity, which was considerable. Fleur was steady in a different way, not hard-edged but deep, the steadiness of something rooted. And Harry held himself still and let them work, which was the hardest thing he'd ever done, not the pain, though there was pain, but the stillness, the required trust, the complete surrender of control in the one area he'd never had to surrender it. His magic, his body, the fragment embedded in his scar. He thought about Hermione's hands on his wrist in the graveyard. About Fleur's face when he'd cut Gabrielle free. About the warmth in the cupboard under the stairs at 9 years old, a coal going from cold to glow. The fragment came loose. It didn't go quietly. It had been there 15 years and it fought with the desperate ugly energy of something that didn't want to be separated, and Harry felt it pulling at him, pulling back, trying to reassert the connection, and he let Hermione and Fleur hold the working and he pushed. Not violently. Deliberately. "You are not me," he said to it, not in words but in intent, clear and absolute. "You were never me. You were always just in the way." The fragment released. Hermione contained it. The containment vessel they'd spent 3 months developing held it with the same principle as the original Horcrux enchantment but reversed, held it separate and diminishing and severed from its origin. Harry exhaled. The cold behind his scar was gone. It was gone in a way he hadn't fully realized it had been there, like a sound you'd learned to tune out that finally, completely, stopped. His scar was just a scar. A mark. A piece of old history with no current occupation. Hermione's hands were shaking. He could feel it through the contact. She was still holding the working, maintaining the containment, but her hands were shaking and he put his hands over hers carefully. "I've got it," he said. "I've got you. You can let the active part go." She let it go. The containment vessel did its work independently. She looked at him with her eyes very bright and her composure in pieces and said nothing. He pulled her in. She put her forehead on his shoulder and he held her and the warmth in his chest was clean and unclouded for the first time in his memory. Fleur's hand was still on his arm. He turned and looked at her. She was not crying. She was not performing not crying either, she simply had a different relationship to the expression of feeling, and what was on her face was everything she wasn't going to put words to yet, and he held her eyes and she held his, and it was enough. "Done?" she said. "Done," he said. She turned the word over in her mouth. Tested it. Seemed to find it accurate. "Good," she said. And then, with the precision and care of someone doing something they've decided to do completely, she reached up and put her hand against his face, brief, deliberate, real, and took it away. Harry looked at her for a moment. "Fleur," he said. "Later," she said. "There are still Horcruxes." He laughed. He couldn't help it, the absurdity of it, her absolute pragmatic efficiency even here, in this. "There are still Horcruxes," he agreed. The final Horcrux fell in May. Nagini, in the grounds of Hogwarts, during a battle that Harry had not planned and had planned for simultaneously, had planned for by ensuring, over the previous 18 months, that every person in Dumbledore's army was capable of holding their own, and by ensuring the school itself knew who was fighting for it. The battle was the full weight of everything they'd built landing at once. Neville killed Nagini with a ferocity that was the culmination of 6 years of someone finally allowed to be what they were. The twins held the Eastern Corridor with inventions that left 3 Death Eaters genuinely confused about which way was up. Luna moved through the chaos with the serene effectiveness of someone who had always seen things differently and was finally in a situation where different sight was the advantage. Hermione and Fleur fought together in the way they'd been practicing for a year, Fleur's precision and Hermione's structural complexity, a combination that was considerably more than the sum of its parts, and Harry moved through the battle like water, responsive and exact, without anger and without hesitation, directing the people around him with the natural authority of someone who had been preparing for exactly this. He found Voldemort in the Great Hall. Voldemort without his Horcruxes, without his immortality, without the cold claim on Harry's mind. Just a man, a damaged, brilliant, ruined man who had made himself into something that had destroyed his own humanity in pursuit of power, and had found, at the end of it, that the power hadn't held. No prophecy now, Voldemort said, and his voice was what it always was, cold, layered, contemptuous. But underneath it, for the first time, Harry heard something else. Something thin. No, Harry said. No prophecy. Just us. You should be afraid of me. I know, Harry said. And I'm not. That's always been your problem with me. What happened was swift and it was not, as the prophet would later describe it, a duel in any theatrical sense. It was two people at the end of something long and ugly, and Harry moved with everything he'd built over 7 years, the training, the theory, the 3-frequency chord in his chest that was Hermione and Fleur and himself, the warmth that Voldemort had never understood because it was the power he truly knew not, and he ended it. Not brutally. Not cruelly. Completely. The great hall went quiet. Harry stood in the silence for a moment. Then Hermione was at his side and Fleur was 2 steps behind her and the warmth in his chest was full and clean and his and only his, no fragment, no cold claim, nothing borrowed or forced or prophesied. He looked at Hermione. She had a cut above her eyebrow and her hair was extraordinary and her eyes were very bright. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him on the train at 11 years old, recognition, warmth, the face of someone who had found what they were looking for and intended to keep it. He looked at Fleur. She had come a long way from the stone house in France with lavender up the walls. She stood with her wand still loose in her hand and her chin at the precise angle she held when she'd decided something, and what she'd decided was written plainly in her expression for anyone who cared to look. Well, she said, in the quiet of the great hall with the battle over and the morning coming through the windows. Now what? Now, Harry said, we decide. Decide what? Hermione asked. Everything, he said. We decide everything. What we do next, where we go, what we build. No Dumbledore's plan. No prophecy. No, he stopped. Looked at both of them. Just what we actually want. For the first time. A pause. So. What do you want? Hermione looked at the ceiling of the great hall, which had cleared overnight into a pale summer sky. She thought about it the way she thought about things that mattered, thoroughly, honestly, without deflection. I want to rebuild the curriculum, she said. The magical education system in Britain is 200 years out of date. Children are being sorted into boxes at 11 and the boxes are making them smaller. I want to change that. She paused. And I want to do research. Real research, into the things we found, the extraction method, the soul theory, the practical applications of everything we developed. It should be documented. It should be shared. Done, Harry said. Fleur? Fleur was quiet for a moment. I want to go home, she said, and she meant France, she meant Grandmere, she meant the lavender house and the garden where she'd stood at 9 years old with her magic pointing north. For the summer. And then, she looked at him directly. Then I want to come back. To whatever you're building. Because I want to be part of what comes next. A pause. And because I have decided that wanting something and saying so are not as dangerous as I used to think. Harry held her gaze for a moment. The thing she'd held back for 3 years, the thing her self-possession had kept careful and contained, it was out now, plain and clean and real, and he found he had no difficulty at all looking at it. "Good," he said. "Because I've been fairly sure for about 2 years, and it would have been irritating to be sure alone." Fleur's expression did the thing it almost never did, cracked fully into something unguarded and brilliant. "You have been sure," she said, "and you said nothing. You were at Beaux Batons. You could have said. You'd have found it insufferable." "Enormously," she agreed, and she was smiling now, full and real, the smile she gave to almost no one, and it changed her face in a way that made Hermione, beside Harry, look away with a small private expression of her own. "Hermione," Harry said. She looked at him. "What I said to you in the hospital wing after the tournament," he said. "About not wanting to do any of it without you." "I remember," she said. "That's still true. And he stopped. Found the right words, which mattered, which required care. "It's not the bond. Or it is the bond, but the bond isn't the reason. The reason is you. The person you are. The way you never made me feel small, not once, not even in the beginning." He paused. "I need you to know that." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said, very softly. "I've known for a while." She took a breath. "The reason I'm still here has nothing to do with magic. It has to do with the fact that you're the most extraordinary person I've ever met and also one of the most genuinely decent, and both of those things are true simultaneously, which is rarer than it should be." The three of them stood in the ruined great hall with the morning coming in through the tall windows and the silence of something enormous having just ended. "Right," Harry said. "Right," Hermione agreed. "So," Fleur said, practical as always, final word as always. "We start." They started. That summer, while the wizarding world rebuilt itself in the slow uncertain way of something that had to decide what it wanted to be after the thing it had organized around was gone, 3 people built something else. Harry retrieved the Potter accounts from Gringotts, vast, architecturally complex, touching 6 separate vaults and a property portfolio that included a house in Godric's Hollow he hadn't known existed, and placed them in a structure that was his, legally and completely, no executor, no guardian, no Dumbledore managing the distribution of resources. He opened the house in Godric's Hollow. Not for sentiment, or not only for sentiment. It was his, and it was good, and the small rooms held a weight of his parents that he carried without pain now, clear-eyed and warm. He stood in the kitchen that had been his mother's and thought about the choices she'd made and found he understood them, and he stood in the garden and thought that she would have approved of what was growing. Hermione published the extraction research. Not through official channels, not through the Ministry or the Wisengamot, she published it directly, through a small magical press that Fred and George had connections with, attributed to herself and Harry and Fleur, with full documentation of the theory and the practice. The unspeakable sent a letter that was professionally worded and barely contained outrage. The research community sent 47 letters in the following week that ranged from astonished to grateful to the particular excited correspondence of people who had been working adjacent to the same problem and had just been given the missing piece. Hermione wrote back to every single one of them. Lupin took up a teaching position at a school in Edinburgh that was doing interesting work in accessible magical education. He wrote monthly, long letters with precise observations and the occasional reference to Sirius's latest attempt to involve himself in every project simultaneously, which was accurate, which was serious, which Harry read with the warmth of something that looked remarkably like family. Dumbledore visited once, in July. He came without announcement, which Harry suspected was either habit or a test, and found Harry and Fleur in the garden at Godric's Hollow and Hermione inside working on a follow-up paper, and he sat with them in the summer afternoon and drank tea and was, for once, not managing anything. He was just an old man. Tired, a little. Genuinely glad of what had been built. Carrying, still, the weight of every choice that had been necessary and the different, heavier weight of every choice that had merely been convenient. Harry made him tea. Let him sit. "I owe you an apology," Dumbledore said, eventually. "Yes," Harry said. I made choices about your life that were mine to make only in the absence of anyone better. Yes. I would, the old man paused. I would like to say I would do it differently. I'm not certain that's true. I was working with what I knew. I know, Harry said. I'm not angry. He meant it. He'd processed the anger over 4 years of seeing clearly, and what remained was something more useful, not forgiveness, exactly, which implied harm he needed to absolve, but a clear-eyed understanding of who Dumbledore was and what he'd done and why, which was better than forgiveness because it didn't require pretending. I'm just not yours to plan for anymore. Dumbledore was quiet. No, he said. No, you're not. He looked at the garden, at Fleur, who was reading in the afternoon light with the complete self-possessed ease of someone at home. She is extraordinary, he said. Yes, Harry said. You are all extraordinary, Dumbledore said, and it was not flattery, it was the specific observation of someone who had spent 60 years identifying extraordinary and knew what it looked like. What you have built, the three of you, it doesn't look like what I planned for. It's better. Harry looked at him. That happens sometimes, Dumbledore said, with a small smile. The thing that grows without your tending turns out better than what you planted deliberately. He finished his tea and left, and Harry sat in the garden for a while after, with Fleur's warmth on his right and Hermione's presence behind him through the cottage wall, and the afternoon sun moving through the Godric's hollow garden, and the silence that comes after very long, very loud things finally stop. The Prophet ran a story in August. Front page, above the fold, the kind of headline that the journalism department had clearly been arguing about. Potter speaks, the war is over and what comes next. Harry had given the interview not to the Prophet's senior correspondent but to a junior reporter named Thomas Aiken who had sent a letter that was direct and honest about what he wanted and what he'd write and what he wouldn't. Harry had read it, shown it to Hermione, who had verified Thomas's previous work, and Fleur, who had said he is not performing his integrity, that's real, and they'd agreed. The interview ran 4 pages. Harry talked about the war without drama and without false modesty, clear-eyed, complete, giving credit where it existed and not where it didn't. He talked about the ministry's failures and what needed changing. He talked about the Horcrux research and Hermione's contribution and Fleur's. He talked about Neville killing Nagini and Luna's insight and the twins' courage and everyone who'd built the DA into what it became. He did not, at any point, position himself as singular. He did not perform humility about his role. He was simply accurate, which was, in his experience, the most useful and the rarest thing. The paper sold out in 4 hours. You're going to have opinions from everyone, Hermione said, reading it at the kitchen table. I know, Harry said. The ministry is going to want to manage your public image. They can want things, Harry said. It doesn't obligate me. Fleur looked up from her own copy. Page 3, she said. You described my shield modification as architecturally elegant. I find this acceptable. Adequate? Harry said. Don't push it, she said. Hermione put the paper down and looked at both of them across the table and her expression was the unguarded one, the one below the competence, the one he got to see now with increasing frequency. What? Harry said. Nothing, she said. I was just thinking. About? About the fact that 2 years ago I was in the Hogwarts library and a girl I'd never met sat down across from me and said, tell me about your theoretical framework from first principles, and I thought I had never met anyone like her. She paused. And that 3 years before that a boy sat down across from me on a train and said, I know, it sounds exactly like something my magic has been doing for 2 years, and I thought the same thing. She looked at both of them. I think about that sometimes. How different everything would have been if the magic had had worse taste. Harry looked at her. Then at Fleur. Fleur was looking at Hermione with the expression she kept for things she'd decided to feel completely, not the composed surface but the honest depth of her, silver-gray and certain. It is strange, Fleur said, to be grateful for a thing you didn't choose. Is that what we are? Hermione asked. Grateful? Among other things, Fleur said. Harry looked at the two of them across the kitchen table in the cottage at Godric's Hollow with the morning light coming through the window and the warmth in his chest, the clean, complete, uncomplicated warmth of something exactly where it was supposed to be, not because the magic had decided, but because three people had looked at what the magic recognized and had chosen, deliberately, to stay. Yeah, he said. Among other things. The tether held because it was real. Because it had been real from the beginning, not from the bond, not from the prophecy, not from any design except the one written in the frequency of three magical cores that happened, across all the distance and difficulty and danger, to be made from the same note. No one owned the fire. That was the thing Dumbledore had never fully understood, and Voldemort had understood even less. The fire wasn't power to be directed or a weapon to be aimed or a resource to be managed. It was simply what Harry was, what all three of them were, and it burned without asking permission and without requiring an audience and without anyone's plan to justify it. It burned because it was real. It always had been.